people registered. And I think that's a great number. We are recording it, so as you saw that notice, we will be able to make it available at a later date. I want to thank everybody for being flexible. Mother Nature did snow us out earlier this month. Canceling was the safest bet for everybody involved, and that decision did create some extra work for Mary Perez and our legislative committee members, so I want to be sure and thank them for the work. In addition, want to be sure that we thank today's sponsors: Kansas Manufacturing Solutions, Opportunity Funding, Grow Labette, Salina Community Economic Development Organization, Wyandotte County Economic Development Council, and the Greater Wichita Partnership. We appreciate their support. I also want to specifically recognize Mitch from Salina and Greg from Wyandotte County, who did a lot of the work for today's event. They are the legislative co-chair people and will have been working with Sandy Braden, our contracted legislative liaison. They've often provided testimony so far this session as it's been needed. You'll be hearing from both of them about legislation that's important to our work later this afternoon. We also know that today couldn't have happened without the work of Mary Perez behind the scenes and Heather Pearson, who's also there helping us with technology today. So I want to be sure to thank each of them. Talked about recording the conference. In addition, we will be making it available to you by a link probably next week. You should be receiving that. You'll also be receiving a survey so you can provide us feedback on today's event and other ways that we can help you. I want to remind you to please stay on mute throughout our presentations. Zoom does have two views. You can use either the gallery or the speaker, whichever is most comfortable for you. The speaker view obviously will focus on the speaker, while in the gallery will let you see your colleagues. Finally, if you have any questions during presentations, I think each of our speakers are planning a few minutes at the end of their presentation to be able to answer to those. So please use the chat function so that we can pose your questions to them. And now, want to be sure that we're ready to go for our first speaker of the day. And Mary, I don't see Governor Kelly. Oh, I see her square, but do we know she's there? We know we've had some of our legislators have to reschedule, but I do know that our staff did log in earlier.
She's on.
Paul.
Hey, Jen, thanks for setting this up.
We know she's there. Should I go ahead and introduce her?
Well, she's on. She just has herself muted and.
How about if I go ahead and then do our introductions, and then when she's here, we'll be good for that. So
Okay.
our first speaker today is Governor Laura Kelly, and on January 14th of 2019, she became our 48th governor. She promised at the time she would do everything in her power to fix the state's broken foundation and make Kansas the best state in the nation for families and businesses to call home. Since that time, the Kelly administration has ushered in an era of common sense policy and fiscal responsibility, allowing our state to invest in Kansas. Since Governor Kelly took office, she's fully funded schools 3 years in a row. She's reinvested in critical services that protect kids and families navigating our state's child welfare system. Under her tenure, Kansas has seen record economic development success. Kansas is engaged in more than 500 economic development projects, totaling more than $7.5 billion invested in Kansas, while creating and retaining more than 40,000 jobs. And through the governor's IKE transportation program, we're completing long overdue road and bridge projects statewide and working to extend access to high-speed internet to every home and business. Throughout her time in office, she has never forgotten her roots. Governor Kelly grew up in a military family and credits that upbringing for teaching her the value of service, integrity, and accountability, characteristics reflected by how she leads our state. She's known for her no-nonsense approach to policy and her commitment to working across the aisle to get things done for our communities, families, and businesses. We're honored to have Governor Kelly kick off our discussion, and I hope she's been able to be connected.
I'm right
There she
here.
is. Great, thank you. It seems weird to not say, help me welcome Governor Kelly and have a big round of applause. So I hope the virtual round of applause will be good, and we appreciate you joining us today.
I feel the love. You're fine. That's great. And thanks, Janet. You know, we have heard a lot of bad news over the past 2 years because of the pandemic, but you know, today is really different. Today, I've got a lot of good news to share. The Kansas economy is strong. You know, I am proud to stand here, or really sit here before you and say, there's more economic opportunity in our state today than ever before in our history. Before I became governor, Kansas was making national headlines for all the wrong reasons. But in 2019, we made headlines again, except this time as CNBC's comeback state of the year. Now, people started to take notice. In 2021, we were ranked for the first time ever as one of the top 20 states for doing business by Area Development's annual survey. We were recognized by Site Selection magazine as having the top business climate in the West North Central region of the United States. And we were named 10th best state in the nation by Site Selection magazine for projects per capita. And lastly, Kansas was recognized with the prestigious Gold Shovel Award. That's an award, a national award given to governors who lead the way in attracting job-creating investments to their states. You know, the Kansas economy is growing, but we had to make sure critical investments along the way were made to get there. As you may know, I appointed Lieutenant Governor David Tolan to rebuild the Department of Commerce and to breathe life into an agency that had been decimated over the previous 8 years. Well, David has rebuilt and created programs within the agency and positioned Kansas to become competitive on the global scale when it comes to business recruitment. We are seeing this investment pay off in real time. We've created more than 580 economic development projects. We brought in more than $8.4 billion in new business investment to Kansas. We've created and retained more than 41,000 jobs, and our unemployment rate has been below 4% for over a year. In 2021 alone, the private sector invested nearly $3.8 billion in new facilities and equipment. That is a state record by a long shot. However, we cannot capitalize on our record-breaking economic success without providing affordable housing options for our growing workforce. When I traveled around the state, a consistent issue I heard was that the lack of affordable housing was a barrier for our rural and our urban communities alike. So in December of 2020, we launched the first comprehensive statewide housing needs assessment in more than a quarter of a century. This study allowed us to develop data-driven solutions to expand affordable housing across Kansas and recommended more funding for programs that address this disparity, like the Moderate Income Housing Program, which my budget this year included an additional $20 million. Because affordable housing is a vital component of recruiting and retaining workers, their families, and entrepreneurs, it is not an option. It is a necessity. We must provide accessible, decent, and safe living spaces for Kansans. But it's not just affordable housing that's going to grow our economy and help recruit businesses. For some companies, a strong transportation system is a significant factor in their decision to move to Kansas. In December, we announced the addition of 25 new highway modernization and expansion projects, totaling $750 million to the development pipeline as part of the Eisenhower Legacy Program, or as we usually call it, the IKE program. We have now started more than 425 new infrastructure projects. All T-Works projects that were delayed due to the previous administration's fiscal mismanagement, are now in the construction phase. We stopped stealing money from the highway fund to fill budget holes. We're making sure that money meant for roads and bridges is actually used for roads and bridges. Doing so will make Kansas even more attractive to do business. It's more jobs, safer roads, and more reason for business to move to Kansas. When we make good investments in our critical services, when we balance the state's checkbook and pay off longstanding debt, it gives us a strong footing. I'm proud to say that we now have the largest budget surplus in the past 40 years. It's because of the fiscal restraint we can provide sensible, responsible tax relief for our families, all while fully funding our public schools, investing in our infrastructure, and providing relief to hardworking Kansans by axing the state sales tax on food. Kansas has the highest food sales tax rate in the country. For our grocery stores in our border communities, sales are hemorrhaging to our neighboring states. Having a sales tax on food also discourages families and businesses from coming to this state. My budget proposal will totally eliminate the state sales tax on food. It's a 6.5% charge. Doing so will save a family of four approximately $500 every year. That's money back in the pockets of every Kansan and a lot less grocery sales being made by Kansans in other states purely because of the state tax. We need to get this done, and we can afford to get this done, and it's time to get this done. But I need your help. Please encourage your state representatives and your senators to pass a clean bill as soon as possible. This issue has broad bipartisan support, and we must and we can get this done for Kansas families. They may tell you that because we passed the Apex bill, which was created to attract business to Kansas, bringing jobs and economic opportunities to the state, that we cannot afford to cut the sales tax on groceries. That is simply not true. We've run the numbers. We have the means to do this. It's time to get this done now instead of kicking the proverbial can down the road. Finally, I want to thank all of you for all of your work to grow our economy and to improve the quality of life for Kansans. You have all been a major part of this success, and you should be proud of this economic growth. And with that, I will open it up for some questions. If Janet, you want to assist me with that?
I'd be happy to do that. Had a couple of questions kind of sent to me as we were preparing for today. One of them is specifically on that food sales tax bill. When you talk about a clean bill, I know there's also been conversation about the definition of food and how far are we taking the definition of food. So would you like to address that as part of the sales tax question?
I can. The sales tax elimination that we proposed was to eliminate all sales tax on grocery items, things that you actually buy in the grocery store or at the farmer's market, for instance. It does not include prepared foods. It does not include food that you would order in a restaurant. Okay? Our bill also, though, protects our highway program by backfilling some of the, if you know, the highway program is funded with sales tax, partially funded with sales tax. And so in order to replace that tax, we propose putting just state general funds in there to keep our highway program whole. So that's the essence of the bill that we have proposed. It has a price tag of about $475 million per year. That is a whole lot of money. But I am very comfortable that we can afford that this year, next year, and for years to come. It's very sustainable. And the reason for that is because of the tremendous amount of economic growth that we have seen in the state over the past 3 years. So that's all real money that's there in our accounts and that will continue to come in as long as the legislature doesn't do any really wild and crazy stuff with our tax structure. And speaking of wild and crazy stuff, that is what they are proposing at this point. They have sort of taken my bill and added to it. by including prepared foods and food that you order in a restaurant. And they've blown that bill up to almost $800 million. You know, mine's 475, theirs is almost 800 million. We cannot afford that. You know, that will tailspin us right back into the economic problems that we had last time around when we had the tax experiment. So I do ask that, you know, they pass this clean bill. We can afford this. Kansans need it. They deserve it. You know, they're dealing with inflation issues day in and day out right now. It's the least we can do to provide some relief for our families. So I'm hoping that they will, you know, get finished with all of the political and the plays and the drama and whatever, and come up with a clean bill and get it to me so that we can help Kansans pretty soon.
Great, thanks. And wild and crazy stuff also tends to happen during turnaround week. And since we're looking at that this week, any thoughts or suggestions of things that maybe hasn't been getting the press that other things have that we should be watching for or looking for?
Well, in terms of economic development, you know, we were able to get that Apex bill done. I very much appreciate the legislature's real expedited efforts to pass that. That's huge. That could be a real game changer here in the state of Kansas, and we'll know if it is in a very short period of time. So I want to thank them for that. I'm not quite sure. I see Paul Hughes is on this. You know, he may have a better idea of some things that are going on in the EcoDevo world. I know that there are some issues going on outside of what you might traditionally call EcoDevo, but impact our economic development, and that has to do with our public schools. There is a big push in the legislature right now to really strip our public schools of the money and move it over into a voucher program to be used in private schools. You know, that's just not the way Kansas does business. You know, public schools are first and foremost in our Constitution. Kansans believe in their public schools. Public schools have delivered for Kansans. You know, we don't have a robust private school system anyway. So if the kids aren't going to our public schools, they're probably not going to be going to school. And so it's important that we keep those dollars invested in our public schools and avoid this push to diminish our public schools and move the money out of there. So anything you all can do to let legislators know that you understand the importance of our public school system and that you want public funds to stay for use in public schools would be extraordinarily happy or good, because it'll make a difference. You know, in our communities that our public schools are a huge part of our communities. In some of our communities, they're the largest employer. And certainly they provide the bedrock for our workforce, you know, in the years to come. So please push as hard as you can on that. And I won't ask you to do anything else because I'd really like you to focus your efforts on the schools.
Great, thanks. And I know from personal experience in Miami County, you've been a big advocate for mental health. And certainly those social services that get wrapped into that. And so have appreciated the focus that you have had in helping shore up those systems and the investments that have been made there. I know there's been lots of changes there and lots more perhaps coming. So anything you'd like to share with us on the area of mental health or your social services?
Yeah, that is a big focus and always has been. Actually, I started my career working in the mental health field. So, you know, I just continue part of that here. I'm a big believer in the continuum of services from, you know, community-based individual therapy to prevention, all the way through our Osawatomie and Larned State hospitals and then post-discharge. So what we are doing now, the way that we are focusing our funds and investments right now are twofold, really, even though we're taking a much more scattershot thing to hit all areas, but really focused on getting mental health services into our schools. We have traditionally had services in our schools, but they've been relatively part-time. They've been working on a school calendar. So over the past few years, we really worked to partner our schools with our community mental health centers so that the community mental health centers are providing the personnel in the schools to provide those services, which means that those services are then available to those kids after hours, on weekends, and on summer vacation. So that's going on. We continue to invest in that and grow that program every year. The other area that we particularly focus on is bringing in more crisis beds in our regions. Instead of depending upon only Larned State Hospital, Osawatomie State Hospital to provide those critical crisis services, we're really trying to branch out, and we have done that. We have increased the number of crisis beds throughout the state in various regions so that people can get that critical care when they need it, closer to home, closer to family, closer to their jobs, which will make resolution a lot more productive when the services do get put in place. So we're working on all of those things. We are continuing to invest. We've got the 988 program, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's a federal suicide prevention line that's being set up. Much like 911, only this for mental health emergencies. And we're working with that. We're working to get the funding for that right now. And then we also will start, once we have that in place, we'll then coordinate the number of suicide prevention lines that we have now. We've got something for our farmers, we've got something for our veterans, we've got something for kids. We need to sort of bring all of that together and have it filter through sort of a dispatch service, which the 988 would provide for us. So lots going on there too. Lots going on in a lot of places.
Well, thanks. And if you've got time for one more, just, you came in talking about all the good news, and some of that good news for us in our world really have been about the broadband dollars that have been able to be invested and the rollout now of the base grant and what that means for several of our communities that may receive those funds depending upon our application. So wanted to thank you for your investment in those areas and your focus in those areas, and just wondered if there was anything on the ARPA dollars or on those programs specifically you might want to share.
Yeah, we have really focused a lot on broadband. As I'm sure you're aware, that the Ike Transportation Program, for the very first time in state history, included state general fund dollars for broadband expansion. Before, anything we had done had always been through federal dollars. So it's the first time we did it through the Ike program, and then we continued to add on to it. When the CARES money came in, we invested heavily in broadband. We absolutely had to make sure that our kids could go to school virtually, that our hospitals could do telemedicine, and that our businesses could operate so remotely. So we invested heavily there, and we're continuing to do that, through a number of the grants that we've had, particularly to hook up some of our rural communities that have been begging for connectivity for years. Been doing that. We've got the base grants out there now, and we are looking, the ARPA dollars are there, but then there's also, we're looking at the infrastructure dollars that will be coming in from the feds that will be designated for broadband. So, to make sure that we were staying focused on this and taking full advantage of everything that's out there, and being able to work with our local communities to make sure that this expansion happens in a productive and expeditious way. We actually created an Office of Broadband Development. We'd always sort of had, somebody who dealt with broadband, but we never actually had an office that was devoted to that, so that we were dealing with it in a more strategic and progressive way, rather than just the sort of one-off stuff that was happening before. So yeah, we're focused like a laser on that. In fact, it's my hope that by the end of my second term, that any Kansan individual or business who wants to be hooked up to high-speed quality internet will be so.
That's a great dream for all of us to have, and I hope that happens. So appreciate your thoughts on that. And so with this trend that we've seen, even with KDOT then investing some of their money in broadband and that focus on getting sites ready, do you think that's an ongoing trend that we'll see more of?
I do. I mean, we know it's worked. And so, I really love to invest money in things that actually work and make a difference. And so as long as that program is making a difference, expect that we will continue to invest in it.
Well, thank you. We know you're very busy. We appreciate you taking time. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before you need to leave for the day?
No, I just want to tell you that it's a really exciting time in Kansas, particularly in your world. There is so much going on all across the state in terms of economic development. Some of it's being driven, out of our office here in Topeka, but so much of it is being driven either by your efforts singularly or in cooperation with our office. So I just hope that we can continue to build on these partnerships and that we can continue to do really good things for all of our Kansas communities and our state as a whole. I thank you for your efforts.
Thank you again. And again, I feel bad that you don't hear everybody's applause and we don't get to stand, and there's some claps for you there. So I hope
I also can't hear their boos. So
well, that's true. I
hope
you get the sense of appreciation that we have for you and for all you've done for us and for Kansas. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, Governor Kelly. We appreciate your remarks. It's always great to hear from you. You are an economic development governor. We're very appreciative of that. And now we're getting ready I'm going to introduce our economic development lieutenant governor and our secretary of commerce. David Tolan is the 52nd lieutenant governor for the state of Kansas. He also serves, as we well know, as secretary of Kansas Department of Commerce. He is a 7th generation Kansan. He was appointed Secretary of Commerce by Governor Kelly in January of 2019, and then added the little job of Lieutenant Governor in January of 2021. So we're really getting our money's worth out of Lieutenant Governor. As Secretary, he's seen sweeping changes, rebuilding the state's economic development agency. He's had multiple in-state, domestic, and international business recruitment activities. The governor touched on the successful job numbers, the project numbers for the last several years, and that number continues to build, and we're all quite excited about that. He's using our new strategic plan, the first one that had been completed since 1988, to help build on the growth of the state. He's fought through this COVID-19 pandemic, working with a tremendous number of programs through state funding. And we all know, we were talking about it earlier, about our base applications being due on the 28th. We're all excited about that program, and I'm sure the Lieutenant Governor will mention that as well. Prior to joining Commerce, he was the first CEO of Thrive Allen County, a not-for-profit coalition, works to improve quality of life and economic conditions in Allen County. Prior to that, he was in Washington, D.C., working for Mayor Anthony Williams. David's married to Beth. They have 2 children. And I know he is a proud graduate, undergraduate, master's degree from University of Kansas. So we all welcome Lieutenant Governor David Tolan. David?
Hey, thanks, Mitch. Good to see you, Janet. Good to see you. I was sitting here thinking about a meeting that we had in your office, Mitch, I believe, back in 2018, after Governor Kelly had been elected but hadn't yet taken office. And I was on the transition team for her, trying to figure out what we do about the Department of Commerce. And that was Andrew Nave was there. We had a bunch of KDA members in that room, and it was not a happy room. There was a lot of criticism of things that have been going on, and we had a lot of work to do. And I'm so happy that the tenor has changed for all of us because of intentional efforts from the governor and our team at Commerce and all the KDA members to just forget about the past and move forward and do good things and work projects together. And it's just remarkable how far we've come. So I'm going to go pretty quickly with this presentation because I want to leave lots of time for conversation. So let's go to the first slide. We're going to hit 3 points. Governor's already talked about some numbers. I want to focus on Apex and what that means and talk about our legislative agenda. So, we're collectively, all of us are racking up awards that are bringing Kansas global attention now. We have come so far together, and you can see that, I'm not somebody who likes to chase trophies and things like this. We haven't had a focused effort on trying to, get ourselves ranked. We've just been doing the work, all of us together. And it's nice to have that recognized by area development, by site selection, and other partners across the country. So good things happening. Next slide. As you know, mine, the governor's first year in office, we had a pretty good year. 1.3 billion in investment in the state, which was, that was solid. Almost doubled that in 2020, despite the pandemic, despite the global recession, and 3.8 billion last year. So 2 record-setting years in a row, and there's no reason to think we won't break that record again in 2022. Next slide. So together, all of us, KDA members, the business community, folks that care about growing the state, we got a lot of work done last legislative session. The work we did on HPIP has been extraordinarily helpful, allowing transferability of those credits. And I'm just so happy when I travel around the country through Team Kansas events and otherwise to hear site consultants get really excited about what we did with HPIP. Governor also had a vision for bringing Kansas tourism back to the Department of Commerce, where it had been for 25 years before it was moved out. And we got that done, and it's going so well. It's really remarkable to see.
I'm trying to
see how seamlessly we've been able to integrate the culture of Kansas tourism and the culture of Kansas commerce into one, and we are stronger and better together. And I'm so pleased with where we are there. Angel Investor Tax Credit, which is an important tool for all of us as we look to grow more knowledge jobs and to ensure that the next high growth companies of tomorrow are founded and can grow and thrive in Kansas. We got that renewed, as well as significant changes to the RHID program. And this is one of the fun parts of my job, my commerce job anyway, where sitting around saying, man, wouldn't it be nice to try and use RHID to do upstairs stuff? And we'd heard this from a couple of communities, and we said, well, let's just do it. Let's see if we can get it done. And we did. And it passed with an overwhelming bipartisan majority in both chambers. And then last but not least, star bonds, which have been a lightning rod for criticism in the past. We listened to the criticism, and where there were changes that we need to make, we made them. And as a result, a lot of that static and noise has died down. Anytime you have a particularly powerful tool like star bonds, there's always going to be some flack that you take. But I feel like this program is stronger and more transparent. And most exciting for me is being able to use star bonds for headquarters attraction. I was talking to a company this morning specifically about that and how this is a tool that's not just for the entertainment and related destinations, but it's also now eligible to be used for headquarters. And we've made it easier to use in small towns like where I'm from. And we've had a lot of interest, including from some very small communities that, we didn't really have in mind, honestly, at the beginning, but they see a possibility, and we're working with them to try and figure out how to get it done. So we did all of that collectively together. And I'm so thankful to KDA members who show up when we need testimony and who call legislators and who have really worked to educate members about the importance, legislative members about the importance of doing this modernization of our economic development toolkit. Next slide. So we've been talking a lot about Apex. I didn't hear, I wasn't on for the whole time the governor was on, so I'm not sure how much she touched on that. But let me just say that, again, we got this done in record time and with strong majorities. 81 votes in the House out of 125 and 31 out of 40 in the Senate. And we did it in a record period. And as a result, our state is highly competitive for this project, which should be announced soon. I'm not sure quite how soon, but we think their board meeting is happening within a matter of hours. So we will know something. And what I think is most significant for KDA members here is that with Apex, this tool is going to help us land the mega projects, and we can have 2 mega projects, one this year and one next year before the bill is set to sunset. But with it, or with any mega project, comes the supply chain. And I'm super excited about what that will mean as we land these projects. Next slide. So you can see what it's for. I think most people in this audience understand what we're trying to accomplish. I think the key is, it's important for us as a state to be in the game as there's this evolution happening in the global economy. There are so many companies which are shifting their production back to the United States, that are reshoring production from overseas locations. And when they do that, it is very, very expensive. The incentive tools that Kansas has had are not designed for these big spend projects where you've got massive depreciation by the company in the first, decade of their operations. They just don't work. And so that ultimately is why we did Apex. We created a tool that is applicable both to the current project that we are working and to the 3 other 1 billion plus projects, maybe 4 now, 1 billion plus projects, which are in our pipeline. So we had a lot of debate about, should we just do a bill for one company to try and get this deal done, or should we create a tool? And the governor wisely said, no, we need the tool so that we can continue this progress and stay in the game. This is not about a one shot and done. This is about the future and setting us up to have a growth rate that is, a couple % a year, as opposed to the, less than, like 0.8%, which is what we saw in the last decade. That isn't acceptable anymore. It's a new era, and we've got momentum now, so we've got to capitalize on that. Next slide. Those are the mechanics of it, which we can talk about if you'd like during Q&A. Next slide. So here's what we're working on now. And I need to be pretty frank about it's hard to get something like Apex through, especially in record time. It takes a lot of political capital. I was joking that the floors of the State House were slick from all the blood that was spilled getting Apex passed. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not too much. I am hopeful, in spite of that we're going to be able to get some work done in 4 other areas. And so go to the next slide, please. On the Rural Remote Worker Program, what we're trying to do is address 2 challenges. One is we've got a talent and housing shortage that is statewide. As a result, that creates pressures on companies that are in our metro areas in finding the people that they need. Sometimes the people they need, though, live in rural places. So for example, let's say you've got a student who goes to K-State, graduates, and then they want to go back to Western Kansas, where they're from. That's where they want to live. But they might want to work for an engineering firm that's based in Johnson County. So we would like to incentivize companies to hire workers that live in rural communities with a $4,000 per job incentive. You can see the details up there. We've kind of approached this as a pilot program. So it's a $600,000 request, which would do 150 jobs. And we'll study this. We'll see if it works. Does it actually influence behavior the way we want to? Does it help both the employers that are in the metros and these communities where folks want to hold on particularly to their young talent, and where often young talent wants to go, but they haven't had the right economic opportunities in those places? Can we solve the problems that we're trying to solve? So $600,000, I believe we passed out a committee earlier this week, and I think this is headed to, it may be on the floor today. I'm not exactly sure. So we're excited about this. Next slide. So film tax credit, if anybody, if you've cut the cord and you're not just doing traditional television anymore, and maybe you're like me and you watched a Hulu documentary in the middle of the night because you couldn't sleep last night, that Hulu and Netflix and all sorts of platforms are doing the production of their content in ways that are dramatically different than what was happening just a few years ago. And when you think about the amount of money that is spent on television and film production by these crews, the sets, when they go into a place, they're spending money hand over fist. The reality is, for Kansas, we don't have any incentives that are meaningful for this type of production to occur in our state. If you look to the south, though, in Oklahoma, they have put in place a refundable tax credit for television and film production. And there's, I think De Niro's shooting something, has been shooting a film in Tulsa, or maybe it's Martin Scorsese. Yeah, it's Scorsese. In Tulsa just a few months ago. There's a boom that's happening in this area as a result of the incentives that Oklahoma put in place. We think this could be really powerful for the Kansas economy if we did it if we did something similar in Kansas. So governor's budget includes $10 million in refundable tax credits to enable this to occur here in Kansas. We'll see how this goes with the legislature, but we feel like it's certainly good public policy. We will need your help if we're going to be able to get it done. And to whoever just popped up on the chat and noted that Ozark is shot in Georgia, that's exactly right. You see the Georgia peach at the end of so many television and film productions because they've been aggressive about it, and it's been key to the growth of that state's economy. Next slide. In the framework for growth, we talked a lot about outmigration of young talent from the state and what do we do to turn that around. One of the key strategies is when you've got people that are started in high school, but in a technical school, community college, a state university, if you can get them into internships while they are still here, you make it a lot less likely that when they graduate, they're going to leave the state because they've already got a relationship with an employer. And so for that reason, we have put in place a $1 million line in the budget, which would create this internship program for small businesses, focusing on knowledge jobs. So data analytics, cybersecurity, software engineering. And so this would be, we think, a good tool for us to get serious about apprenticeships in a different way. And we think it's again, part of implementing the framework for growth that we all collectively worked so hard to get put in place. And next slide. And then here, so small business R&D grants. Again, this is about creating the next high growth companies of the future. And also it's about harnessing the power of our state's research institutions all the R&D that exists in particularly the six Regents institutions plus Washburn, to grow the Kansas economy. And so these are modest grants. You can see $25,000 a piece, but it is intended to help us grow the next Gatorade, which, if anybody knows, Florida Gators, it's a University of Florida endowment related product. The time release capsule was invented at where else? University of Kansas. You've got lots of good technology that has come out of our institutions, but you got to have some of this small seed funding to get them going. And so that's the idea here: marriage of private sector entrepreneurs and higher ed. Next slide. Okay, so that's it. Would love to take your questions and comments. So thanks so much.
Okay, we're bound to have some questions out there. Yes, I've been noticing the Georgia peach on a lot of shows that I watch late at night, it seems like. So it'd be nice to have the Kansas logo up on some of the shows.
Yeah. I didn't touch on base grants, but I do want to remind everybody that application period closes on Monday, and be sure to not wait till the last minute. Get it in. We think we've designed a robust system here, but last time I checked, we had over 370 applications in process that are in draft form, and there were only about fewer than 10 that have actually been submitted. So it's going to be highly competitive. Don't wait till the last minute.
We have a question. Do you think there'll be a second round of base grant applications?
I sure hope so. There's $100 million in this first round, and there is so much pent up demand and need here, and also opportunity, frankly. It's been forever. I don't even know the last time the state did something like this, if the state has ever done anything quite like this. And so we're going to have so many worthy projects that we can't fund because of the volume. And so I hope there will be another round that will ultimately be up to the Spark committee, which is a 7-member committee that also needs their recommendations approved by the State Finance Council that the governor and legislative leaders head. So we'll see, but I think part of the case that will be made is, $100 million allowed us to do X number of projects, but we've got this huge list beyond that that we've scored. Let's see if we can keep tearing through that list with another X amount of dollars. So we'll at least be able to quantify what the demand is by having the application process.
David, there's also a question here from your friends at Thrive who were talking about the housing report and how important it was and how much information was in there. Wondering about the possibility of doing a similar report related to help state the business case for early child care and for education expenses. Are there any plans on the horizon for something along those lines?
Not at the moment, but I think it's a great idea. One of the things the governor has done, and this takes me again back to December of 2018 when we met and talked about how Department of Commerce was in shambles and how do we get this thing back on its feet. Governor Kelly in her budget has included significant enhancements for commerce to allow us to not be as bootstrapped as we are. We have been able to get things going on a shoestring here. I mean, it really has been a tight budget. There's not been a significant increase at all in our budget since we took over. Now, fortunately, we've been able to get creative and leverage other dollars and work with our partners like KDA to make good things happen. But in the budget this year is some support to allow us to, for example, get back a team that looks at data. The whole analytics side of commerce, the research side of commerce got gutted in the last administration. Those people have been gone for 10 years. Fortunately, we have Haley Peterson, who is been working with the business recruitment team, who is one of these crackerjack, whiz kids that has given us some chops on data, but we need a couple more people just like Haley to continue this work. Well, that'll be funded. We've got $1 million for broadband that would allow us to get that office so that it's not just a couple people, but it's, hopefully 5 people when we're all said and done. Get that thing on its feet. Childcare has been a priority of the governor and of our department because it's such an important nexus to job creation and business growth. We just haven't really had the bench to be able to go as deep as I would like on that. So with any luck, we get this bill, we get the governor's budget through the legislature intact for commerce, and that'll free up some capacity or create some capacity here so that we can do that kind of report about the EcoDevo childcare nexus and where do we have gaps. And we'd be working closely with Melissa Rooker and the Children's Cabinet on that.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions that's come in. Why don't you give us a little update on and what your thoughts are for the changes at Team Kansas?
Yeah, I'm so excited about Team Kansas and the continuing evolution of this 49-year-old organization. I was asking the other day, when was the Kansas Cavalry officially started? Well, it was 1973. And in 1973, they created a model that evolved in the 70s and then into the 80s. Secretary Harlan Priddle, who was the first Secretary of Commerce in the late 80s, took Kansas Cavalry and really supercharged that. And then it evolved in the 90s and ultimately became Team Kansas in the first decade. And the evolution continues today. So for those who aren't aware, Jose Romano, who's been Commerce's East Coast business recruitment rep for the last 3 years, is the new president and CEO of Team Kansas. And Jose is such a creative and dynamic leader, and his job is to grow Team Kansas so that we can have that private sector partner of the department, of KDA and all of us be as strong as what we have in, particularly go just east of us in Missouri, the Missouri Partnership. They've got tons of money. They put out all sorts of reports. It's a really powerful tool. We don't have quite that war chest yet with Team Kansas. We're going to get there. And I'm so thrilled by the vision and leadership of the Team Kansas board, which, bought into the concept of hiring a full-time person for the first time in the almost 50-year history of this organization and its predecessors. And I think we're going to do big things. I also want to stress 2 points. First, we want to make sure that that Team Kansas isn't competing with any membership-based organizations that are in the state. That is not the goal at all. What we do want to accomplish is growing the pie and getting businesses in particular that maybe aren't plugged into any of our local or state economic development efforts to see the value in doing that. And so that's goal number 1. And goal number 2 is I want to make sure that smaller EDOs around the state can be members of Team Kansas in a way that doesn't break the bank. And I think it's particularly important for those members to go on some of our trips where we get around the country and we're talking one-on-one to site consultants. And I know that from a budgetary perspective, that can be hard. But there's so much you learn on these trips. It's such a great visibility opportunity for communities. And so I hope that we can figure out mechanisms to enable communities that aren't currently members of Team Kansas, or they're members, but they're not really getting a lot of value from the membership, from their membership because they can't afford to go places. I want to figure that out and make it more valuable. So Jose and I have talked about that at length. We had a 4-hour meeting on Monday night about it. And Chairman Blake Schreck and I are meeting tomorrow talking about these same things. And so just really grateful to the leadership of Team Kansas for, continuing to evolve that organization to meet the needs of today's economy.
Hey, we're about out of time. I'll throw you up anything you want to say that we didn't touch on before. Lieutenant Governor, if you'd like to throw out one more item for the crowd here, and we appreciate your time.
Let me just say this. I didn't talk anything about quality of life here, but I hope it is clear that quality of life underpins everything that the Department of Commerce is doing. And I hope it's baked into everything that all of you as our local partners across the state are doing. If people don't want to live in communities because they can't picture themselves there, because you don't have the right housing product, you don't have good schools, or you don't have good parks, or you don't have good childcare or any childcare at all, if you don't address those quality of life factors, you can't keep the businesses that you've got, and you can't attract new businesses and residents there. And so I've talked a lot about incentives and dollars and cents and legislation and all those mechanical pieces. And that's really important for us as people in the biz, in the economic development biz. But when I'm talking to regular folks that aren't in this world, what I always try and stress is you've got to focus on quality of life if your community is going to be competitive. And that is something that I think if I've done one thing at Commerce, I hope that I have been able to change the culture here a little bit so that there is that emphasis on quality of life and that we're thinking about the totality of the package, not just the dollars and cents. So with that, grateful as always to KDA. Thanks for having me on, Mitch, Janet, and everybody. Reach out if you need anything, and wish you guys a great conference. Wish we were doing this in person. We almost did.
Got close.
A darn snow. So good to see everybody.
Let's give the Lieutenant Governor a hand. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Vernon, would you like to do our next introduction?
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Lorenz, our Secretary of Transportation here in Kansas. Julie Lorenz was appointed by Governor Kelly in January of 19 to lead the Kansas Department of Transportation. With more than 25 years of experience, she's recognized as a national leader in the areas of policy development, collaboration, and scenario planning. Previously, she directed national engineering firms, strategic consulting, and public engagement services for transportation projects at local, regional, and national levels. She was recently elected president of the Mid-America Association of State Transportation Officials, a collaboration of transportation leaders representing 10 Midwest states to advance highway, transit, and related issues important to the region. Lorenz also serves on the executive committee of the Transportation Research Board and is chairing the Council on Aviation for the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. She is also a graduate of the University of Kansas, Rock Chalk, where she earned a Master of Arts degree in organizational psychology, and Drury University, where she earned a Bachelor of Science in both psychology and business administration. Her role of secretary is her second tour of duty at KDOT, as she served as the Director of Public Affairs from 2003 to 2011. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Julie Lorenz.
All right, hello, everybody. Thank you very much. And I am hopeful, Janet, you have my presentation.
I believe Mary Perez does for you.
Okay, or Mary. Okay, and Mary, if you'll help with advancing the slides, and I'd like to start by saying I don't have a legislative update, I'm glad to say. We don't have a legislative agenda this year. We have a fully funded, knock on every piece of wood around you, a fully funded transportation program for the first time in 10 years. And there's a tremendous amount of good that we can do with those funds. And I would echo what the Lieutenant Governor said. It is all about quality of life, and transportation is an important underpinning of quality of life. So if we can go on to the next slide. So instead of doing a legislative update, I'm going to tell you about how we're using those state funds as well as some additional federal funds that are on their way to Kansas. Let's start first with our namesake, President Eisenhower. And the point that he's making here is, I think, absolutely true. You know, transportation used to be viewed as just roads and bridges, but we've got so much more that we can do. And we need to make sure that each investment that we make both stands the test of time and is leveraged to its highest and best use, thinking across the transportation system, which is actually a system of systems. Next slide, please. So a modern system, transportation system, it's going to move people and freight as it traditionally has, along with technology. And I know we've already had some conversation around broadband, and broadband is one of the programs that's funded through IKE. Next slide. An important thing, and I suspect most of you on this call today understand that 85% of the US population is within a 2 days drive of Kansas, which gives us a real natural advantage in terms of logistics and freight movement. So something to keep an eye on when you're thinking about economic development. Next slide. And clearly you can see here that the Kansas economy is dependent on transportation in many ways, from manufacturing to wholesale and retail trade, where you can see with stars where we're above the US average. Next slide. A quick update on some economic indicators. You are all familiar at both the national and global scale. There have been significant supply chain disruptions, along with, we also know about workforce shortages. Next supply. And if you look at the bottom right of the next slide, there we go. We certainly have our experience here in Kansas has mirrored that at the national level in terms of some import and export challenges. Okay, be safe on your horse. It's cold out there. What I would say, though, is keeping in mind that our location, our central location, provides us with a strong opportunity to leverage our location to address some of those supply chain issues, because we're close to domestic markets. And we certainly see firms, companies that are interested in increasing or diversifying their supply chain options. So I think we've got some good opportunities here because of the strength of our infrastructure, and particularly transportation, both on the rail side as well as on the highway side. And we're a leader, as you know, air capital of the world on the aviation side. Okay, next slide, please. One thing to bear in mind, and we just chose food as an example because it's one of our primary exports, but about 12% of the cost of production relates to transportation costs. So anything we can do to drive down the cost of transporting goods or services helps make our businesses more cost competitive, more profitable. And you'll see in a minute some of the things we're doing to try to drive down the cost of doing business related to transportation. Okay, next slide. So in terms of passage in 2020, the IKE, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, was passed with 4 hours to spare before the legislature went home for an abbreviated session due to COVID. It was at 2 o'clock that Thursday afternoon with strong bipartisan support. 94% of legislators supported the new program. It's a $9.9 billion program over the next 10 years to strengthen the infrastructure and to help grow economic opportunities. Next slide. We've had good progress on IKE. I'm pleased to announce that we have seen more than a 200% increase in construction activity. All of the new programs, and there were several that have been established under IKE, have been launched despite COVID. So there are many more opportunities now for communities to access funds. You can think of it as our portfolio is both broader, more diverse, and more open to communities. All of the T-Works projects are now underway. Those were delayed projects. All of them are underway as required by the legislation. And I'm also happy to say that our workforce is in a safer place now than it was previously. We have seen a decrease in workforce accidents by 46%, even though our work activity has significantly increased. And last year we saw over $1 million in savings from worker comp reduction in worker comp costs. Next slide. So when you put these two pieces together, IKE, which is the state program, along with the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law, that's the federal law, or sometimes called IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which equates to about $1.2 trillion of investment across the US. We really have some opportunities to make significant investments in not just transportation, but in infrastructure writ large. And we want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of these dollars. And I'll talk about those in just a moment. Next slide. But before getting to the nuts and bolts of the money, I'd like to talk sort of more philosophically about how we can think about using or deploying these dollars in ways that can be most helpful to Kansans. And going back to the comment about quality of life. So when you think of our two favorite sons, President Eisenhower and Bob Dole, and there's some lessons we can take from them in terms of deploying dollars. And it's a phrase I've started to like to use, which is ad astra simul, to the stars together. You know, our state motto, to the stars through adversity. I feel like we can check the box fully on the adversity part over the last 2 years. So I'm just moving on to talk about the together part, because I just think it's a good place. It's a good frame for this next part of the conversation. Okay, so next slide, please. So in terms of IKE, President Eisenhower, his vision was big and bold, and it absolutely banked on the fact that folks could figure out how to work together. And so he talked about, you know, the first time the full interstate system that would connect sea to shining sea. Another thing I'd like to bring up is investments in infrastructure need to last more than a generation and more than a lifetime in many places. And we're quite frankly still driving on some of IKE's infrastructure. You can see here, more than 9,000 bridges were built when he was president or before that time. So we clearly have a need to invest in our bridge infrastructure. We have about 25,000 bridges in Kansas. Of those, about 20,000 are on the local system. Okay, next slide, please. And when we think about Bob Dole, his crowning legislative achievement, he has often said, was the American Disabilities Act, ADA. And he knows better than most about the need to help support the right of Americans to have access to transportation and to infrastructure and to jobs. It took him about 50 minutes. He had to allocate about 50 minutes every day to get dressed. So he knew firsthand from his wound, you know, from his injuries in the war. So he took helping disabled people very seriously. He also understood that you couldn't cripple American business either. So he fought for reasonable accommodations. He also fought for tax credits for small businesses that would implement reasonable accommodations. And he absolutely went to bat for this idea that it's not either or. It's not helping disabled people or protecting business. He said, we can be better as Americans. We can figure this out. And that's what true problem solving is. It's rejecting that either or thinking. It's about looking for the and in terms of solutions and solving problems. Next slide. So I joined Twitter last year. It's quite a place. You can learn some good stuff. You can learn a lot of crazy stuff. But this is a frame that a lot of folks use, which is kind of like tired thinking, wired thinking. And this, I think, is a good way to think about this. So kind of some tired thinking is, man, best solutions are either delivered by the public sector or by the private sector. And at KDOT, in terms of deploying and implementing IKE, we say, no, it can be both. We look to communities to shape our project selections. We look to the public sector to provide guidelines. We encourage private investment. And we're also looking for ways to incentivize long-term progress. And I've seen several of you on the call today that know when we talk about building new projects, we go right to communities and we look for partnership in what those projects are going to look like. And we also look for partnership in terms of scoping or down scoping and asking for some money so that we're all moving in the same direction at the same tempo. And I want to say thank you to Kansas communities. We are having great luck, great success in this approach of not either or. Okay, next slide. So in terms of the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill, and I now say we have two best friends at KDOT. We have Bill and we have Ike. But this bill funding in terms of what's slated for Kansas over the next 5 years is about $3.8 billion. And I want to be careful here to say, like, caveats all over. This is what we've been able to piece together so far. Not all of this is new money. Some of this is formula money that we've received previously. Some of it is plus up money. So we're still working through the exact details of how the dollars shake out. But these are the big buckets of funds, and these are formula dollars. These are dollars that will be flowing to Kansas. In some cases, cities or counties may be administering the dollars. In some cases, it's the state. It's a significant amount of money for sure, but not in all cases is it actually new money. There's a separate side to the bill law, which I think for most of the folks on this call, you guys are going to love because you're entrepreneurial and you like to compete. So there is almost as much new money on the discretionary grant side as on the formula side. So there are a lot of grant dollars to go after. And I would suggest that we're going to be much more successful if we're approaching those grant opportunities from a regional perspective than from just like one community on their own. So we have actually hired a grant writer at KDOT, and she will be available to help cities and counties, not in one-off sorts of ways, because I don't think that's how we're going to be successful. But for example, if we could think of pick a region, the Northwest, where we would put together a package of bridges to seek additional funds for, Vanessa will be available to help pull those applications together. Okay, next slide. So this is a good example of how those dollars break down for KDOT. So while it was a big number, probably 2 billion on the previous slide, what we anticipate is about 145 million more dollars per year, broken down these ways. About 89 million more for highways. So when you think about the US 69 project in Johnson County, for example, is 300 million. North Junction in Wichita is about 200 million. $89 million more, very helpful. A crazy new amount of money? No. Helpful, but not a bejesus amount of money, but helpful. $45 million, this is new money, very important. It will help us get to that bridge inventory of ours as a state that is really starting to age out. It is our intention to use the bulk of this money for city and county bridges. Electric vehicle infrastructure, $8 million will be made available per year. Some of you may be aware that we recently deployed, I think it was about 2.3 million. It was at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, for about 7 charging stations. We had hoped to get to 12. We were only able to afford 7. It is not our intention to own that infrastructure. Kansas owns plenty of infrastructure. This is seed money to work in cooperation and collaboration with the private sector to deploy charging across the state. We have a long way to go on this. We lag the nation. That was VW settlement money at 2.3. This 8 million additional each year will be very helpful. We'll be putting a work group together to help us prioritize the direction of those funds. Rural transit, we'll see about a $3.7 million increase. I have some concerns about that. It isn't that there isn't a lot of need on the rural transit side. There is a tremendous need. We just have difficulty recruiting bus drivers and keeping those bus drivers. And it is hard to deploy services, as you all know, services across a really big geography with few people. So I have some concerns about that. We're working hard to figure out how to deploy those dollars best. And then you see on the far right, I've already talked a bit about, we know that we're gonna have a lot of opportunities to go get grant dollars. And I look forward to working with communities to bring those dollars home. They're gonna get spent one way or another in America. We ought to try to bring some of those dollars home to Kansas. Okay, next slide. Our goal with the additional bill dollars is to save lives, reduce transportation costs, as I just talked about, and strengthen our communities by innovating our infrastructure. Next slide. We know a well-delivered transportation system, which will do those things I just talked about. It cares about you, it's affordable, and it innovates for now and later. I've got a couple of specific examples I'll share with you. Next slide. So making roads safer and saving time. It ranges from out on K-156 in Hodgman County, where we're just trying to get a little bit of shoulder out on that highway. So important. I took a tour of that highway 2 years ago. it's concerning to have buses out on that road. And I know those sorts of roads exist all across Kansas. So we are implementing what's called a clear zone program to try to get a little bit of shoulder. It is not the best improvement that you'd ever want on a highway, but where we can put a little bit of shoulder within the existing right of way, we are working hard to try to figure out how to do that across the state. North Junction, that's a great example in Wichita, one of the highest rated projects in the state. We continue to chip away at that, 25 million, 50 million at a time to try to improve not just freight moving through that area, but also to get commuters to and from work safely and more, and faster, quite frankly. And you can see a nice quote there from Andrew Weens from the Wichita Chamber about creating jobs and delivering long-term economic opportunities. Okay, next slide. I love this story coming to us from Robin Macy. She used to be part of the Dixie Chicks. So the great thing about this story, small community, about 1,000 people. It took them 6 years to raise $60,000. They needed $100,000 to build, to build up the berms because BNSF has double tracked through their town. And now they blow horns at least once an hour, but often more times than that, day and night, 24 hours a day. So through our cost share program, which is all communities are eligible to apply, it requires a 15% match. But for any infrastructure, for any transportation, although we do also look at other infrastructure opportunities, they were able to build up the berms. And now, as she says, I love this quote, it's going to be a shot in the arm, so you don't have to blow their whistles anymore. It's a way to start. People will be encouraged that small town America really does have a voice in this world. Absolutely quality of life, not to have trains blowing their horns every hour, 24 hours a day. Okay, next slide. Another good example, and this has the little piggy bank at the top. It's about really trying to leverage dollars, in this case on US 69 in Overland Park, our first managed lane project in the state. So we're adding a lane in each direction. That lane will be tolled. The other 2 lanes are free, air quotes, because nothing in life is really free. But if you choose to drive in the tolled lane, and that price will vary depending on the amount of traffic, so we can keep the first 2 lanes moving pretty well. That 3rd lane will move at pace. It's an approach you see all across the country, in Dallas, in Denver, in other places. It will help Overland Park raise their local cost share portion, which is $30 million. Once that amount is complete, we'll have another conversation if they want to keep the toll on to help the traffic move, or if they want to take it off. So great new approach there. It's a much more entrepreneurial approach than we've used previously in Kansas. Next slide. We also have a short line rail program, which helps our shippers more cost effectively move their products, again, all with the eye toward trying to drive down the cost of transportation. That's under the IKE program. Next slide. We implemented, along with the Department of Ag, Home, which is a pilot program to try to get additional broadband out to farmers if they're willing to plant 1 out of 4 fields in a cover crop, embrace some water conservation and soil health principles. It helps them get additional broadband so that they can access carbon trading markets. We're not suggesting that carbon trading markets replace other crops. It simply opens up yet another market for our farmers. The road usage charge study, be happy to come back and talk with this group sometime. We know over time, as we see more electric vehicles, we will receive less gas tax. So we got to figure out a way in the long term to pay for transportation. We're doing a study, and I want to emphasize it's an opt-in voluntary study, but your members might be very interested. We've had a lot of interest from Chambers of Commerce. And so your members may be interested in joining the study, the conversation as well. Next slide. And so while we don't know exactly how we're going to allocate those bill dollars, what I can tell you in the success of the program is all built about from the power of and now we'll run through the last set of slides pretty quickly. It's that rejecting that either or thinking like Bob Dole. So we will put together and deliver for both rural and urban areas. Next slide. We'll craft policies that are supported by both Republicans and Democrats. Next slide. Whoops, one more there, thanks. We'll deliver with public sector principles and private sector urgency. Next slide. This is an awesome little slide here. So MJ, she's now 5 years old. She's one of our local consult groupies. Her grandma's been bringing her to local consult since she was 3 years old. But she's the perfect representation, right? We're making investments that need to last, not just for our generation, but for MJ and beyond. And this is a quote that comes to us from Southwest Kansas, that, people are looking for more. They're looking for more than jobs, not just for pay. They need this quality of life. And I struggle with that because I don't think quality of life is really like the right language. They're looking for a good education and recreation and sport activities and shopping because they want to do more. People want to do more than survive. They want to prosper and they want to stay rooted. And I just think that's a lovely quote, a lovely way to think about it. Next slide. And so with that, we really look forward to investing and making our way to the stars together. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. If you have questions, drop them into the chat box. But we do already have a couple questions. The first question comes from Greg Kindle in Wyandotte County. He's curious to know what role you envision for KDOT around EV movement and perhaps not just electric charging stations, but is KDOT looking at buying electric trucks themselves?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so I love that question. So the $8 million per year, and that's guaranteed for 5 years, which I should have said from the start. That's one of the things that makes the BUILD program so valuable is the certainty around funding. So some of that money can be used for electrifying fleets, and those fleets could be KDOT fleets, they could be school buses. So that will be part of the work that the work group takes a look at, is what's the best use of those funds. But I have to say, I think early on, it will be on the charging side, because we just know that we have now closed, once the VW money is up and running, we will be down to just one major gap. I think it's on I-70 from Salina for about 70 miles west. So a gap is defined as something more that is more than 50 miles. But we know that we've only really started on I-70 and I-35. We have a lot. We got a big state. We got a lot of ground to cover. So I think we would look at charging stations first, though some of that money can be used for fleets.
Great. You mentioned one question was about how do you replace the revenue lost because of the fuel tax? So you talked about that study group. Sounds like that might be a great topic for one of our upcoming webinars for our membership, and then see how that conversation evolves with our group.
Would love to do that. Love to.
Great. One more question. Secretary Mike King, when he was here, had a dream and talked with other states along the US 83 corridor about turning US 83 from Texas up into the Dakotas into an interstate. There was, and I can speak from experience because US 83 goes through Thomas County. The amount of truck traffic on US 83 grows every year. And in some areas it's getting quite dangerous. And so just curious.
Yeah, we've had good conversations about the 83 corridor with communities. We're doing some work and we're doing some advanced planning. I can't speak to the designation of an interstate. That's out of my pay grade, right? That's a federal decision. But that doesn't mean, I would take it in a different direction. What's most important is to make sure those are good, safe connections. Right. And so we have implemented, and I'm quite pleased with the IKE program, which is now a 2-year rolling program. So you might recall previously, KDOT would put together a 1 year of one list that will last for 10 years. And good news, if you're a community on the list to get a project, you got it. And if you were not on the list, then, like I talked to you 10 years from now, well, that makes for not a very dynamic nor responsive sort of program or agency. So now we talk with communities every 2 years. We put projects, Governor Kelly talked about putting projects in the development pipeline. And then every year we pull out projects from the development pipeline and commit some projects to construction based on our revenue. So it's a much more nimble way to make investments. And it's also a more realistic way to tie. And it goes both ways. if your revenues aren't as high, you don't commit as much to construction. Conversely, you get additional federal dollars, you can put more in the construction pipeline. So it's a more nimble and I would argue a more accountable process.
Fantastic. If we have just one more question, we'll finish. This I just popped in. And I think it's a great question because it takes us away from the normal rails, cars, trucks, and that kind of thing. And the question is any of the new infrastructure funding usable for biking, hiking, and trail development projects?
Yes. Like, yes, 1,000, yes. Now, I'm not, there again, we've got like the discretionary, the grant programs. And then what you see is a big emphasis on things like if you're going to replace a bridge, try to include a pedestrian accommodation. Also, there will be opportunities as we look to, there are ways sometimes, right, you can shift federal dollars maybe to pay for preservation work and then take those state dollars, which are often more flexible, and move those into other kinds of categories. So it's a really dynamic environment. I'm thankful that we got Ike passed because it gives us the framework to really maximize those options.
All right. Do you have any last comments before we let you
Looking
go?
forward to seeing my friend Mike Beam up next.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Please join me in thanking Secretary Lorenz for joining us today and a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you, Vernon. Deborah, would you like to do our next introduction?
Absolutely. Hello, Janet. It is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce our next speaker, Mike Beam, our Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture, who was appointed by Governor Kelly in January of 2019. Mike Beam came to the KDA following 38 years of experience in association management for the Kansas Livestock Association. I'm sure you all know him in both of those roles. He has dedicated his career to assisting farmers and ranchers to advance their policy and their public relations needs, and in building highly visible, responsive, and respected organizations. And way back in the day, he began his career as a county 4-H and youth extension agent in Dickinson County. Following his graduation from Kansas State University, and he has a bachelor's degree in animal science and industry. In his role at the Kansas Livestock Association, where he began in 1980, he participated and led coalitions in strategizing and implementing legislative and regulatory initiatives, and I'm sure he's still doing a lot of that today in this role. He has brought that collaborative spirit to the KDA, where he has led the agency in efforts to provide a really solid environment for long-term sustainable agriculture in our state, and he's a great friend to agriculture and all of our communities. So please help me welcome Secretary Mike Beam. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Deborah. That was awful kind of you. And I look forward to visiting with you folks and maybe even more importantly, hearing from you. I hope to not only just have responses or answers, but learn from you as well. I will try to go with my slide presentation and see how we're doing. Is it up? Hit the cover slide. All right, thank you. So one of the statutory responsibilities for the Kansas Department of Ag and the Secretary is to really promote Kansas Ag, to help educate people about it. And so I like doing that. Many of you know much about agriculture in Kansas, but just a little bit of background on the scope of it in this state. So agriculture, I think we think about what we see from the roads, what we read and hear about, and maybe think about it in the past. But you know, the real mainstream sectors would be beef cattle ranching and wheat and corn production, the crops that you see in the fields, such as sorghum and soybeans, maybe dairy. That's what I think a lot of folks think about when they think of agriculture. But if you look at the sectors, we consider, landscape and horticulture services, pet food. Pet food is continuing to gain strength as Kansas being a real leader in the pet food manufacturing, farm machinery manufacturing, food processing. Those are still all part of agriculture. And if you look at, there's 536 sectors that in Kansas. we've flagged 72 of them as being agriculture, food, and food processing. And those 72 sectors, have a direct economic impact of $47 billion. Indirect and direct and induced would be 67 billion. So, it's a pretty big part of Kansas. And, it's over 12% of the workforce is related to those 72 sectors. The top 5 sectors in the state of those 72 on the ag front would be beef cattle farming and ranching, animal slaughtering, grain farming, meat processed from carcasses, and farm machinery and equipment manufacturing. Those are the top 5. And we rank, Kansas is pretty diversified. We rank in the top 6 in many categories within agriculture. Yes, we still are considered the wheat state. There's probably, there are other sectors that have grown and surpassed it, but we're still number 1 in winter wheat. And you'll see the slides that I have on the various categories, but we're up there with, sorghum, sometimes referred to as Milo, Landon farms, sunflowers, cattle and calves. So we're, like I said, we're fairly diversified when you compare us to the other states. And again, we rank pretty high in many of these categories. I won't go through this extensively. But what I do like to show people is the heat map from the economics of output of value of ag products across the United States. We're number 5 in Kansas. So if you look at the previous 4 states, first 4 states would be California, Texas, Nebraska, and then Iowa, Nebraska, and then Kansas. So we're right up there. And I'll talk a little bit more about this southwest quadrant as you'll see a little darker shade of Kansas. And here again are those top states that I mentioned earlier. But if you look at it within the state of Kansas and the counties, the top 10 counties as far as value of ag production, I like to tell folks that, some of these counties are fairly low population, but when you look at the impact of market value of agricultural production, you'll see that there's a lot in that southwest quadrant. And then, of course, you reach up to northwest Kansas and central Kansas as well. But Haskell County is the number 1 as according to the 2017 ag census of ag production. So we, because we are such a big ag state and we produce more than we can consume, international trade is pretty key. And one of the things that occurred as we got through the first year of the pandemic, things were pretty depressing for a good part of 2020. In addition to the pandemic, the exports kind of dried up, and the markets, the agricultural markets were really suffering, but things kind of rallied in the last half, at least the last quarter of 2020. And we had ag exports from Kansas surpass $4 billion, first time since 2014. But it's even more so. If you heard the governor's State of the State address, you heard her say that 2021 will surpass considerably the ag exports from Kansas from 2020. And it'll be a little while before we have those final numbers in. But some of these commodities had some of the best export year of all time. Now, and when I say export, this is the international trade. This is export outside of the United States. But this is the one thing why, agriculture as a whole, I think agriculture pays close attention to what happens with federal policies, because, trade agreements have a big impact on our ability to export and handle and to support up our markets. These are the products that we've exported, the top 10. You'll see that, and this is the ag, of course. Meats is a big one, followed by those other categories, including, some of these are a direct result of our meat processing. But a big demand, $4 billion from ag exports in 2020, and again, it'll be higher in 2021. And here's our customers. Our number one customer is Mexico. As far as all ag exports, it'll vary considerably depending on what is being exported. But these are very important partners to us for Kansas agricultural producers. So, you know, we do support and try to be involved where we can as lending support and facilitation and exports of ag product, working on market research. So we have a basic understanding of some of the protocols and regulations and hurdles that it takes to export into certain countries. And, you know, we hold membership to some of these international trade groups and actually serve in a leadership capacity in the livestock genetics export, meat export federation, and food export. There's several businesses in Kansas that have been able to access the food export arena through the help and support of the Food Export Association of the Midwest. And then, you know, prior to the pandemic, you know, again, we worked with on many international trade missions as to support this, most recently with Argentina, Uruguay, and Zambia. And then the Philippines opened its market for bovine embryos. And we responded, a producer in Kansas was the first to export embryos, beef embryos into that country last year. So I'm going to show you a few slides, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each slide, but I think it'll show you why what we do in Kansas for growth in various value-added sectors makes a big difference in the economics of farmers and ranchers throughout Kansas. But we are connected, and I always like hearing from Secretary Lorenz because her effort and work with our whole transportation system has a big play in, you know, the profitability and the ability for our folks to market both intrastate, interstate, and internationally. So this is just a slide that I thought was interesting. It shows on the various commodities what we've produced, and you know, corn now is far exceeds wheat, but again, we're still the wheat producing state. But here's what I was trying to get to. So basis, when you hear something about basis in the agricultural market, that's essentially what the local price is compared to the futures market. So you'll see in this heat map, when it comes to corn and you look at the Midwest, so this whole region of I'd say the western 40% of Kansas, you'll see we have in that blue, you can sell corn in that area 21 cents more per bushel than what you can in some of these other regions of the country. So there's a lot of demand locally for corn. And producers of that corn in that region really benefit, especially when you look at parts of you know, south central Nebraska and north central Kansas. You know, that's a 27-cent discount. So you know, that's 48 cents differential in the value of your commodity. Grain sorghum is a little different, of course. Not near as wide a basis in this state, but again, there is some support for sorghum compared to other parts of the country. Soybeans is a little bit different. We don't really have a strong basis, but I would say the addition of the new plant in southeast Kansas and Montgomery County is going to change this map considerably, where there'll be a stronger, much stronger price for soybeans in that southeast part of Kansas. Here's a wheat. You can see in the real wheat belt left of Kansas, that north central northwest Kansas, you kind of at a discount on a per bushel basis. But if you grow it in the southwest part of the state, it's just a little closer to the futures price. So one of the things that we've done, I think for 5 years, was hold our annual Ag Growth Summit. And I imagine some of you have attended that. And because of the restrictions on meeting in person, we had to do this a little bit differently in 20 and 21. So we've held lots of meetings last few years with various producers, stakeholders, and kind of broke those out by sectors where we had a lot of discussion about, what are our opportunities, what are our strengths to growing, various sectors of agriculture in the state. And we've been able to, the one positive thing of a virtual meeting with sector breakouts is we've been able to reach more people that way than we have trying to concentrate all of them in one location on one day, once a year. But like I said, they were held virtually this last year. So we summarize these each year, but at the end of the 2021, we went back and we looked at 18 sectors and kind of what were the recommendations or challenges. And here are some of the common areas of emphasis that were constant that kind of rose to the top. This is nothing new for all of you who follow this, but workforce is still seen as a barrier to growth in this state. That includes agriculture, some extent on the farms and ranches, but in the production, processing, and grain handling and ag equipment manufacturing. So that is a barrier. Where we can really gain is if we can get more value-added opportunities. So I'll take you back to that map that showed the various bases. Part of that strong basis that you noted for corn, particularly in the western part of the state, is because of the value-added opportunities from grain to cattle to meat. And I think that's probably been very much a focal point of all studies about how to grow agriculture in this state, and that is add the value locally. Somehow, if you can add the value locally, we'll only grow, and those are examples. So I think we need more of that, and there's a lot of support in various sectors to focus on how can we get those value-added businesses and industries either growing or adding new ones. Education and outreach, that surfaced on many of the discussions in the various sectors. And of course, in many parts of the rural areas, our cooperative extension service provides that, and there's still strong support for adequate funding of that. And research, we've got to continue to find a way of producing more with less and being economical. Infrastructure, I always get inspired when Secretary Lorenz talks about the opportunities that we have now and are going to have, and boy, that comes to the forefront when you look at some of the highways, the bridges, rail, even inland waterways. That's a big opportunity, especially if we can do it strategically within this state. The one area it's always a big risk for our state because we're such a large animal industry, but I don't know, you probably don't follow as closely as I, but there are some foreign animal disease threats outside of basically North America at this point. But we spend a lot of time in preparedness and planning, emergency planning, in case we do have a disease outbreak in this state or even in the region. It will have a big impact on the whole state, for that matter. I know the governor talked about broadband, and I always applaud her and Secretary Tolan when we look at trying to boost that. But former Secretary Sam Perdue, I've always remembered this, but this quote's been attributed to him, but broadband in rural America will be as transformative in the 21st century as rural electrification was in the last century. And I think that's very true. And that's the drumbeat that a lot of people in agriculture, particularly the more rural areas, continue to remind folks. We still have a ways to go. When you compare us to other states, particularly like Nebraska with internet access, I think what this does not depict is how the quality, the speed of that internet. So at one point, we were trying to get internet access to everywhere. Now it's really the focus is on high speed, both download and upload. And so we're always going to be supportive and encouraging of the Department of Commerce in their projects and local communities, for that matter, to really enhance our broadband and internet access. And we have partners. We found out that this is a benefit in the education front and also in the healthcare in rural Kansas as well. One of the things I kind of touched on it, but I mentioned when we're trying to do more with less, there is phenomenal amount of interest and drive with, particularly on the waterfront. We know that we'll have to be, we need to be smarter with how we use, how much we use, when we use water and other inputs because of the cost of inputs. And there's amazing progress in the precision and the technology that's available. But we've got to have the training and the education, and we have to have the connectivity to be able to use this on our farms and ranches to really to make it work. But it has such a big critical role in disease traceability if that would occur, and yields and costs, and I just can't overemphasize the importance of having the high-speed internet access to even the most remote areas of the state. And again, I kind of brushed over that, but local communities, it usually comes back to their engagement and their support. And we applaud those who are being local leaders that are trying to help make this happen. And I kind of hinted at this, but you saw the map of where some of the highest value of production occurs is in some of the most lowly populated areas. So we've got to think about how we expand this, not just in the population areas, but in the areas that have a lot of high economic contribution. Let me close with a kind of a project that we started in the fall of 2019. And 2019 was not a good year economically for a lot of producers. And then we hit the real mental stress of the pandemic, at least the first half of 2020. So we started working with private and public partners on trying to assemble help and information and a go-to place for folks trying to deal with stress, mental stress. And we started the website called kansasagstress.org. And it's even more, it's been more popular and more demand than what I envisioned. But we saw in 2020, we saw the number of hits on our website go up substantially. And then as economic conditions started improving and we're a little bit more open for business, the number of hits and concerns seemed to drop off. And then again, ironically, when we had lots of wildfires across the state, there back in mid-December, we saw hits going back up again. So this is a tool that's always, it's always under construction. We're always trying to improve it, enhance it. And it's a lot of different partners. We're not creating anything new. We're just trying to collect and disseminate. And you'll see a lot more about this because we received a grant from USDA to market this, if you will, and get this out for folks. So we welcome your input if you go to it and visit and have some thoughts. But we know it's not always going to be the people that really need it, but if it's somebody that you know is struggling, hopefully maybe it can be one tool to utilize. So I see it's 2:50 and I've went through my slides. I hope this is helpful or of interest, and Deborah, I'd sure be happy to respond to any questions if you have any.
We actually do have a couple of questions, so thank you for leaving time for those. The first one comes from Greg Kendall, and he asks, how should we as local economic developers better engage with your team at the Department of Ag if we have food processors in our community, or if we want to be attracting more food processing in that value added realm that you mentioned?
Well, please give us a call, and if we know that that there's an interest locally, you know, we have an ag marketing crew here that's used to going out and working with, you know, local folks, and actually have had, you know, over the years that I've been here, you've had several meetings. If there's an interest in maybe one particular value added center, or even if you're trying to assess what's a possibility in this community, what would be accepted in the community. So I think we've got a really strong team here, and if you folks haven't met them and have been looking for them, let us know, because we'd like to be engaged in this and help where we can.
Well, thank you. Your team is always great to work with. Another question I guess I have is related to the workforce crisis that really crosses all sectors of our economy, and the ag community is not immune to that. And I don't know if you shared it today, but oftentimes you've shared about the average age of folks that are working in production agriculture in our state, which is a high number. And so we have people that are aging out or wanting to have a succession plan at the same time we're in this workforce crisis. So how would you say our state is faring in that regard, and what are we doing to get out in front of that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I should have, I guess I should have anticipated that. But the one thing that we're trying to do, which may seem like to be too small a scale, but is trying to introduce youth at the high school level in the career opportunities there are in these various sectors. Because you know, there's a lot of folks that would really enjoy working in some of these sectors who may not have a very strong ag background, but you know, it may be a niche that really fits their interest and their skill set. The other thing that I'm hoping to learn more about, but Kansas State University recently received a multi-year grant, and they're starting a new excellence center for succession for farms and ranches. And I think they're just, you know, getting this off the ground. But that's what they're going to be there for, is to work with individual farmers and ranchers who want to enter into some kind of succession plan. There may even be, it's probably too early to tell, but some states have tried a kind of a match program where, you know, young people are trying to get involved in agriculture. Another generation's trying to phase out. They don't have anybody in their family who's able or willing to be a part of this business, and trying to match those folks together. So I'm anxious to learn more about that, and we should maybe try at some point, at least locally, we can try to engage with them, because I think there's a real need, and this could be a big opportunity.
That's excellent. Okay, one more question before I turn it back to Janet. And this is still in the realm of education. One of our community partners who has a community college asked, how can our community colleges help quickly build more precision ag programs? So, you know, more technology is being deployed in the field all the time, and we need people who can work on that, as well as, you know, just the operators understand it. So how can we help seed some of that at the community college level?
Well, I don't know if I know how, but I know I have to believe there's an opportunity, there's a need. Obviously, the one that comes to mind is the Northwest Kansas Votech Center, who's really excelled in this area, and I think they may be called upon to help other areas. But there's, with more and more interest in sustainability and adopting technology and marketing, credits. I still think that there's a niche there, an opportunity for community colleges to fill, and probably locally. It needs to start locally with a group that says, hey, this is important. This is important in our region, and if they can provide support and guidance. But I certainly think there is some more opportunities for that.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us, Secretary Beam. Let's give him a round of applause and appreciation, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Janet, back to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Deborah, for handling that. Wanted to be sure that we took a few minutes to pause and thank our sponsors. When they agreed to be sponsors of this event, we thought we were going to be in person. We thought we were going to get to have a great reception. They're not getting quite everything for their marketing dollars that they had planned on for their sponsorships. So wanted to be sure that we gave them a little bit of time to say hello, tell us a little bit about what they're up to, because we do appreciate the fact that they have been very flexible to us as we've kind of moved through the snowstorm and of earlier this year. So Tiffany is here and she is going to talk with us a little bit from Kansas Manufacturing Solutions. So Tiffany Stovall, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janet. And I think flexibility is what we have all learned over the last year or two, more than what. So yes, I'm Tiffany Stovall. I'm CEO of Kansas Manufacturing Solutions. We're the NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership for the state of Kansas. The MEP is a national public-private partnership program under the U.S. Department of Commerce. There's centers in all 56 states plus Puerto Rico that are dedicated to serving small to medium-sized manufacturers. One of the things that we've been up to a lot, just like all of you all across the state. But one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about from our manufacturers are the supply chain challenges. We heard just a little while ago from Julie Lorenz, who talked about the supply chain challenges in Kansas, and it absolutely is an issue. And it was already an issue, but then the pandemic just exacerbated the challenges that already existed. So in October, we launched Connects Kansas. Connects Kansas is a supply chain database system that connects all state manufacturers into a searchable database that allows manufacturers, suppliers, and buyers to quickly post and respond to the needs, to their own needs, to the needs of their supply chain, but also to help visualize their supply chains and their supply chain risk. They can search for qualified manufacturers and discover new business opportunities through things like RFPs. So we're really excited about Connects Kansas, about this online tool. It is just that, it's a tool that helps put Kansas manufacturers' supply chain, put them deeply into the supply chain network and really integrate them with, it integrates also with the National Manufacturers Marketplace, which you all may have heard of, out of the National Association of Manufacturers, out of NAM. So check us out at connectskansas.com. So that's connectsks.com. And really what we need you all to do is to encourage your manufacturers to go online and to create an account, register their business capabilities. And this will give them the opportunity to find resources in their supply chain, as well as be found for sourcing and growth opportunities. Without manufacturers participating both here in the state and across the country in these tools, that's all it is, it's just a tool. So thank you all. Thanks for the opportunity to share about that.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. And if you could put that website perhaps over in the chat.
I sure will.
I did get a chance to do a little bit of preview of the program. And if I remember correctly, it is free for the manufacturer to be able to participate. And one of the things that impressed me when I went through it was the protection that they have for the manufacturer in such a way that somebody who sells widgets or maybe sells that part can't really get in there and then spam all of the manufacturers that you encourage to participate in that portal. And I think that's an important feature of that. So I was impressed with the security that they provided the manufacturers who are willing to offer their information. So appreciate your work on that, Tiffany.
Awesome, thank you.
And then Doug, were you gonna take a minute? You want to take a minute and tell us what Opportunity Funding is up to these days?
Thank you, Janet, and my compliments to KEDA and all of the members and the exciting work that you're doing across the state. It is really fun to hear and see the great things occurring. Opportunity Funding provides consensus-built strategic planning and 5-year capital campaigns to implement your strategic plan. Remember, the more your stakeholders help write your plan, the more they will help underwrite your plan. Opportunity Funding has raised almost $60 million for economic development organizations, almost all of those in Kansas, and in all sizes of communities, large, medium, and small. Currently, we've raised almost $400,000 in pledges just from 2 investors in a community of 2,500 people, and we're well on our way to surpass their $1 million goal. Many of our clients are using their funding for major new initiatives like in workforce attraction, housing development, daycare expansion, entrepreneurship, and even the more traditional business retention and attraction. We want to thank the many people and organizations at this conference today who've used Opportunity Funding services. We've seen much growth due to our mutual success, and we've added to our team at Opportunity Funding. We've actually just completed 3 successful repeat renewal funding campaigns for economic development organizations who are recharging and increasing their funding sources. We're having great success, and we've seen businesses increase their pledge amounts by 50 to 100%, even in the shirt tails of the pandemic time period. We work in increasing both private and public funding. And look, I've walked in your shoes. So for those of you who do not want to be subject to those knots in your stomach, every time your elected body changes or they vote on your budget, we've had really great success in providing more stable, long-term funding commitments from the private sector. So we're passionate about helping Kansas economic development organizations get the resources that they need to be successful. The vast majority of you are now using this method of funding. I'd encourage you, don't continue to sit on the sidelines while your peers continue to make progress. If you'd like to have a private one-on-one counseling session to share your needs and ask questions to see how we may assist you, please reach out to me, Doug Kinsinger at Opportunity Funding at 785-554-8785, 785-554-8785, or you can check us out at our website at opportunityfunding.net. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've done on behalf of our communities and with our businesses. So I see that Adam dropped in there your website. So I would encourage people to reach out and see how you might be able to help their teams. So thanks for being here today. Also want to be sure that we recognize Grow Labatt. Jim Zielinski is here, but I don't think he was going to chat. And then the Salina EDO, but Mitch is off working on his base applications, I believe, with his county commissioners this afternoon. So, so with that, Vernon, I think you have an introduction for our next guest. You're still muted, Vernon. And that's the first time I've had to say that.
Yeah.
Over 2 hours.
Sorry. I didn't see Ryan pop up there. Oh, there we go. Hey, Ryan. All right. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Ryan Vincent from the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, who is the executive director there, the public corporation that serves as the state finance agency. A 15-year veteran of the corporation, he previously served as staff attorney, general counsel, and deputy director. Ryan is a graduate of Washburn University and Washburn University School of Law, serving with the Law Clinic and the Washburn Law Journal. He has been a licensed attorney since 2005. In his free time, he enjoys serving on several nonprofit boards, including 2 terms as president of Topeka Habitat for Humanity and as a committee chair for a local Cub Scout pack. So welcome, Ryan Vincent.
Well, Vernon, thanks so much for the warm introduction, and it's great to see so many friends on this Zoom call. I know everybody hoped to gather in person a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know how you all do it. We just have a way of getting cold weather that comes with these events, so maybe it's good that we're all inside in front of our computers. But I know we've got a lot to cover during this next half hour. I'm going to move through my presentation as quickly as I can, because home has never been more important than it is this very minute. There is so much happening on the policy front, so much happening in the economic development work that you all do. So my thanks to Keita and to Mary and to Janet and everybody who extended this invitation and this opportunity. I'm going to share my screen. If you'll give me just a moment here to make sure I'm doing it correctly. Oh, it looks like the host disabled, so I may need to get some kind of access to be able to do that. Just a second on the technical side. And well, as they're getting the permission for me to be able to share my screen, I can at least maybe share my agenda of what I'll be covering during this presentation. I recognize that a lot of you may not know much about Kansas Housing, the work that we do, the people that we serve. So I'm going to give just that 30,000-foot overview of the corporation. Then I'm going to jump right into the programs we administer, specifically on the development side, that have a lot of interaction with the work that you all do on the EcoDevo side. I'm going to talk about how housing and COVID have certainly changed the work that we do at our office. Then we're going to talk about the first statewide housing study that has been coordinated through the Department of Commerce in our office in 30 years, and the next steps in implementing that work. But it looks like now I've got the access and the permission, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And if you'll just please let me know if you have any trouble seeing it, because it always makes you all disappear.
You're good, Ryan.
Does it look okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thank you. So jumping right into the agenda that I kind of went through, we'll just jump into the presentation itself with an overview of KHRC. Years ago, we were actually part of the State Department of Commerce. We broke off as an independent, self-supporting, nonprofit public corporation and have been around almost 20 years. We administer a variety of housing and community programs. Our mission is simple. We help Kansans access the safe, affordable housing they need and the dignity they deserve. Well, who do we work with? We work with you, folks that are working for economic development, lenders and realtors and housing advocates, developers, builders, nonprofits. If you live, breathe, do business in the state of Kansas, you're a stakeholder of Kansas Housing. Our programs themselves really run the gamut from providing that literal shelter, that roof over our heads that we all know is so important when it's so cold outside, as well as funding domestic violence centers and shelters. We provide tenant-based rental assistance. We have a network of community action agencies around the state that receive funding through our office. These are all wonderful partners that cover your neck of the woods. So I definitely encourage you to check out my slides that I'll be providing after the presentation. There's links embedded so you can learn about those partners. My focus today is really about our housing development programs. I'm going to touch base on those, but so you also are aware, we do offer down payment assistance. We have a healthy weatherization program that provides free weatherization upgrades for income qualifying households. We've got a healthy compliance department because we know that if we're going to invest in your communities, that we want that investment to be a good one. We want to be good long-term neighbors. We want to serve the folks that the funding and the housing is intended to serve. And finally, with the pandemic, we've spent a great deal of time on emergency response. We've run a very successful emergency rental assistance program that I will just briefly touch on, as well as a homeowner assistance program that we'll be launching here in the coming weeks. So those are the range of services that we administer at our office. But jumping really into housing development, which goes hand in hand with economic development, KHRC administers housing tax credits from the Department of Treasury. We get funds from HUD and from a couple of different federal funders. We're able to take those tax credits and those grant funds, and we're able to finance gap financing for affordable housing developments around the state. In 12 communities benefited from that funding in 2021 alone, with 540 new affordable housing or affordable homes across the state. But of course, a picture can speak 1,000 words. So let me just give you a couple examples. This is in Salina, Kansas. It's the beautiful Lee Building. It's a historic structure that we were able to finance through our home and our tax credits. And it's a wonderful example of how a little bit of investment in housing that gets much needed moderate income and low income housing for the city of Salina, which is growing with Tony's Pizza and with Great Plains Manufacturing and all kinds of businesses wanting to grow, but don't have enough homes to go at night. But it's also a nice example of how through housing, we're able to save a historic property where Lee Jeans started. So great history, if those walls could talk. We're also able to be part of the downtown redevelopment, which is so essential for our main streets in our communities, as well as just be a catalyst for jobs and for economic growth. It's a win, win, win. This is Stony Brook Homes in Scott City and Norton and Hoxie, where we were able to finance 15 single-family units that will eventually be homeownership. It's a wonderful example of how we're able to invest through these federal programs in communities that haven't seen a lot of new housing built in many years. This is Solana Village in McPherson, Kansas, where we're able to serve households with disabilities. We know that there's different audiences out there and stakeholders that are so vital, including persons with disabilities. We're able to provide housing specifically for seniors or for families. We know that there are so many diverse housing needs in our state, and we're ready to be part of that solution. But honestly, the solution needs to be more than just low-income housing production, because there's a big band of our state that make too much to qualify for our affordable housing programs, but they don't make enough to meet the basic needs of the market. We've seen studies that it's averaging $200,000, $225,000 per home now to construct a home. And yet we have teachers and firefighters and healthcare workers and people that our communities need that simply cannot make enough through their jobs to pay for the market needs of housing. And that's in rural and urban areas alike. Fortunately, our state legislature recognized that when they created a moderate income housing or MIH program that's been going since 2012. It's a wonderful, responsive program to the needs of local communities. We're able to provide loans and grants to cities and counties in rural communities for everything from infrastructure to actual housing development to single family homeowner assistance. We're responsive to local needs where we're not telling local communities what their housing needs are, they're telling us. And through the flexibility of this state funded program, we're able to fund it. Unfortunately, we get $2 million a year, which doesn't go very far. It's 69 cents per Kansan per year for this program. And it's, even in rural communities, we're not able to really have the reach that we want. Here's a map showing where our applications for the program have come from, literally all over the state. Here's a map showing where we've been able to award housing development. Some of these are extremely small counties that have very low population, and we're the only funder of housing in some of these communities. So we're honored to do that and take that mission and that role very seriously. I talked about the income band. This program serves households between 60 and 150% of area median income. For a household of 4, that's between about $45,000 and $115,000 a year. Again, these are the people that we need for our communities to be successful and for you to be successful in your economic development roles. Again, let's look at some pictures and some successes. This is in Dodge City, where we were able to finance 14 moderate income housing units. And I love this example because not only are we funding housing of today, but we're investing in housers of tomorrow. We know that if we don't have people swinging hammers in 10 or 20 years, that we're not going to be successful in our mission, and you're not going to be successful in yours. And that's why through MIH, we're able to pilot some programs where we work with communities that have partnerships with Dodge City Community College and trade students, so that we've got that houser of tomorrow swinging the hammer of today. Here's a nice example in Atchison, what we were able to do through the MIH program before and after. It's another historic structure, the YMCA building, used to be a preschool. We've been able to build 16 units of moderate income housing. Here's the interior view of the property. It's beautiful housing. And I think that's the important thing to remember, that affordable housing of today is some of the best quality, accessible, affordable housing that our communities have seen in quite some time. There's a nice example from Stafford County and St. John's, where we were able to partner with K-State School of Architecture to develop some highly energy efficiency housing. And we were able to provide homebuyer assistance for this housing. It's a nice model of not only investing in our architects and our housers of tomorrow, but being able to do some little pilot programs that hopefully we can replicate on a larger scale. So I know I'm flying through this. That was a very high level overview of our housing development programs and the work that we're capable of doing. But I can't talk about housing without talking about COVID. And we all know that COVID and the pandemic has changed life as we know it for so long. And home has never been more important than it is right now. Home has always been the place that we've needed for healthy neighborhoods and families and communities. But now home is where we work, where we school, where we access healthcare, where we have community meetings, 4-H, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, you name it, it's happening from our homes. And when we have so many Kansans who have lost work, have lost income, have lost so many things and have had added expense, we have a lot of folks who are at risk of losing their homes. Fortunately, KHRC has administered a variety of funding sources that have been provided through the federal government in response to the pandemic. We've got about $25 million we've awarded to emergency shelters and community action partners. We launched and ran a successful $20 million program to keep people in their homes in fall of 2020. That segued to our emergency rental assistance or CARA program, where we can provide rent and utility and internet assistance. I've got a screen to kind of show you an update on where we're at with that program. I alluded to the Homeowner Assistance Fund, which is a program we'll be launching in the coming months, which will provide assistance to homeowners who are behind on their mortgages and utilities and taxes. We have $56 million available that will be going out to keep Kansan homeowners in their homes. As far as some metrics on our CARA program, so far we have served 15,000 households. We have made over 6,600 landlords whole in our state. We've gotten almost $101 million in emergency rent, utility, and internet assistance. I'd highly encourage you to look on our website at kshousingcorp.org, find out about the program, and get the word out to your communities that we have this resource available. We're going to make our small landlord businesses whole. We're going to keep Kansans in their homes so that they have the hub that home connects us all to. So that's the emergency response work that we've been doing at our office and through partnerships with people like you. And yet we know that the underlying crisis that we have in our state right now would not be the crisis it was if we didn't have an underlying housing problem for generations in our state. And the first step to addressing that housing problem is to take a snapshot. And that was done with the Office of Rural Prosperity and KHRC when we completed the first housing study in 27 years in our state. It was a year-long effort. We had over 70 listening sessions. We got over 4,000 survey respondents. We had a great meetings where my staff and my team and myself learned a lot in having great meetings. But ultimately, we released the study in December of 2021. It's got wonderful information that's on our website. There's high-level executive summary. There's regional data that I'd encourage you to check out depending on what region of the state you're in or representing. We've got a story map tool, which is an interactive tool that allows you to look up specific information in a visual format. We've got goals and strategies that we definitely want to be talking about. So check that out. As far as the state level, there's great recommendations for the state. There's great recommendations for local government. And it's not just about funding, it's about how to utilize existing programs, how to build on new resources, how to invest in our housing contractors and skilled labor force of tomorrow. But as far as state level, one of the keys is expanding our MIH program. There are bills in the legislature that are considering that very investment right now. Some of those bills would allow us to expand our reach into urban areas. It would allow for larger grants. We've got a menu of investments to the state for ARPA investments at the State Spark Task Force. We've been making recommendations to our local communities about how they can invest their dollars in housing to meet some of the needs identified in the study. We're also working with the State Department of Commerce about how to incentivize housing through some of the business programs. We're talking about workforce development for building trades. So there's all these different efforts that are ongoing that you're going to be a part of. And we know that it's not something that will be solved today or even tomorrow, but is going to be an ongoing initiative, but it's not going to be a study that sits on the shelf. Let's just talk briefly, since the legislature is going on, about what we offer right now, because we all have resources available with the federal dollars, with an excess surplus of state general fund dollars right now. We all want to make a difference on our housing problem immediately. So what I've been highlighting to our economic development partners, as well as our policymakers at the State House, is that KHRC has a universe of unfunded applications that are on our desk that are ready to fund. In 2021, we funded 9 out of 28 applications that were ready to fund. In 2020, we funded 7 out of 24. Combined, we estimate that there are 24 multifamily applications requesting $9 million that are ready for development, but for KHRC having the resources to award. We estimate that with $20 million for our moderate income housing program, we could build approximately 590 MIH units in the very near future. Beyond MIH, I referenced our housing development programs. In 2021, we had 12 developments that were denied simply because we lacked the amount of resources, the tax credits. Those developments were pencil ready. They could have funded 247 new construction units, 205 rehab units. Half of our developments are done in rural counties and communities across the state. Again, there's not a lot of housing development being done in these regions. We estimate that with $20 million, we could fund 4 additional 2021 developments, getting 160 new units of housing. That's the universe that we already have. We know that if we had additional resources, we could put out an RFP. We could have communications with local communities and builders and developers and stakeholders and partners with our economic development agencies. And we could come up with ideas for getting additional dollars out the door to get that actual housing development for moderate and low income households in Kansas. That's the opportunity we have. That's the charge that's before us. I invite you to definitely contact us with your ideas, your questions. There's a link here where you can join our mailing lists so that you can find out when we launch new programs like our Kansas Homeowner Assistance Fund. Definitely encourage you to follow us on social media. My contact information follows. And I apologize, I kind of flew through the slides, but I will be following up this presentation by sending the links, the presentation itself with the links, so you can maybe review it all as you have more time. But at this point, depending on time for questions, I can stop sharing my screen, and I certainly welcome any questions that you all may have if time permits.
All right, we do have a couple of questions that have come in for you, Ryan. First question was that you guys have been promoting a program to help homeowners with mortgages and taxes. How's the rollout for that program going to go?
It's a great question. This program was actually created under ARPA back in March of last year. Of course, like any federal program, it takes time to go through the approval by Treasury and to work through the different requirements on that end. Fortunately, we're at the end of that process now. We did get approval. We've got contracts that have been entered into, and we're getting ready to launch the program itself. We've got partnerships with not only bankers and mortgage servicers, but also with housing counseling agencies, because we know that that's a key partner to make this a success. Ultimately, there will be funds available for mortgage assistance, but also for people that are behind in their taxes, their insurance, even their utilities. And that's very similar to the resources in the program that we're administering for the emergency rental assistance. But I'll tell you, it's been so tough for the last year since we've been running KARA to get calls from folks that own homes that are behind, and we have no resources to offer them. So I'm excited personally for that opportunity. We know there's a need. The data is about 26,000 households in the state were behind on their mortgages. We know that the pandemic has just made a world of hurt for folks, and we've got one additional resource that we can get out the door quickly. But I do, based on our projections, we anticipate once the program launches that we do think it will go through the funds pretty quickly. So I definitely encourage you all to get the word out there that, you know, the funds may only be available for 4 to 6 months, just depending on demand. But a great question. And I would certainly encourage you, we just sent out a note to all of our stakeholders to sign up through a text for when the program launches. And you can certainly do that just by going on our website at kshousingcorp.org.
All right. Another question talked about, let's see here. You know, the study that was, the data from the study that was released in December, there were a lot of recommendations in there, and some of those obviously, and you touched on it a little bit, some of it related to recommendations for legislation. What's, you know, what's the status of that legislation, and how hopeful are you that we're going to get that passed?
Another excellent question. And I'll tell you, I've never been more hopeful than I am right now on the state policy side. And it's through some partnerships and advocacy from some of the folks on this call. I've been going on actually 17 years now at KHRC. I realize my bio is a little bit outdated, but you know, housing has just never been at the forefront, and really it's never received the attention it deserves for not only the importance that of just general importance of home, but of economic development. I'm just hearing from businesses that want to expand all over the state, from Russell Stover's in Iola to the dairy in Dodge City. We are at the point where we simply cannot grow our businesses and our jobs without housing, without homes for our staff to go to at night. I mentioned moderate income housing because it's probably the biggest barrier. We have some resources to address low income, but we don't have the resources to address the moderate income, short of that little $2 million we get. There are something like 6 bills at the State House that offer everything from an expansion of MIH, the Moderate Income Housing Program, to seed funding for our State Housing Trust Fund, which could fund a number of these different initiatives. There's an opportunity for a program that would create loan guarantees to address some of the appraisal issues on the single family side in rural communities. There's an expansion of tax credits. I don't know what, if any of these will ultimately pass, but what I'm really pleased about is the level of recognition that our employers and our community leaders and our partners across the state have, that this is our time, that the stars have aligned, that we have the data from the state housing study, but we also have the momentum that's being gathered from the pandemic and from a recognition that we've got to do something about this if our state is to succeed. So the time's now. And again, it takes partnerships, but I truly believe something's going to happen this session. And I certainly encourage you all to be having those conversations with not only the legislature, but with the Spark Task Force so that we can get some good long-term investment for housing.
All right, well, thank you. We've run over a little bit, so we'll just take a moment to once again say thank you, Ryan, for all that you do at Kansas Housing Resource, and we appreciate you being with us today. Good luck.
Thanks for the opportunity. Great to see you all, and thanks for all that you do as well.
Thanks again, Ryan, for doing that, and Vernon for doing the questions and answers in the introduction. This year, we did make the decision to add housing and childcare to the conversation that we're having, because we've all been facing that, particularly for the last 3 or 4 years. We've been feeling more and more of the pressure, and during COVID, and we knew that they were going to be hot legislative topics that this group was going to want to participate in and be supportive of in the way that we can. And so, Greg, I think you're teed up to introduce our next guest to talk about childcare.
Thanks, Janet. I am very excited to introduce our next speaker. Since 2019, Melissa Rooker has served as the executive director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund, where she provides leadership of the programs funded through the tobacco settlement and advises the governor and legislature. Melissa has led an interesting career that includes having worked with Clint Eastwood's production studio. She is a former Kansas State representative where she served for 3 terms, served on the Johnson County Education Research Triangle Authority Board, education co-chair for the Council of State Governments, and has won numerous awards for her service and leadership. Melissa is a steadfast advocate for Kansas children and families with a depth of knowledge on the issues impacting our children. She shares our commitment to expanding and improving early childhood educational opportunities and understands the childcare challenges affecting our communities and businesses. I've seen firsthand her desire to forge new partnerships and innovation around childhood programming. Super excited to have her be part of our program for the first time. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Melissa. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Greg, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the group. The interest in childcare as a driver of economic development is something that I know I don't need to dwell on because this group obviously is made up of folks who are dealing with this on the ground every day. I want to do a little bit of framing for you about the work that the cabinet has been engaged in, the Children's Cabinet, through a federal grant that we were able to land a one-year planning grant in 2019. So really fortunate timing to in the year just prior to the onset of the pandemic, we did a deep dive into the early childhood care and education mixed delivery system statewide. And what I mean by that is it's a partnership of 4 agencies. So the Kansas Children's Cabinet teamed up with the Kansas Department for Health and Environment. They obviously have the Bureau of Family Health and Child Care Licensing. So programs within that bureau touch on the families we serve. The Kansas Department of Education, clearly preschool and pre-K and all those early education opportunities. And then the Kansas Department for Children and Families, they have the Child Care Subsidy Program and other economic supports for families in Kansas. So the team of our 4 agencies did a deep dive into where we were across that constellation of programs and services on a statewide basis. Deep dive of listening sessions. We took input. We calculated over 6,000 Kansas voices, informed the comprehensive needs assessment that we wrote, and we took in 45 needs assessments from other agencies and programs. So we felt really good about the comprehensive nature. We did our own listening tour and held 53 public community engagement sessions where we asked the same 3 questions. What are the challenges your community faces with regard to early childhood? What is your vision for where your community would like to be if all the barriers were addressed? And we asked for bright spots. We wanted to hear what's happening, what's innovative, where communities have found success so that we could learn from those successes. All of that information was synthesized into a report, and the key takeaways were that too many Kansas children are growing up in families where their basic needs are not being met, and geography matters. Where you live and where you're trying to raise your children matters in Kansas. Even within a community, where you live in that community can affect your access to programming. So with that in hand, we identified a number of areas to focus on: access and availability, the difficulty navigating our array of services, the physical environment for children, the lack of space, physical space, and programs equipped with the right the resources for the kids to be considered high quality and good early learning environments. And then the major focus really is around workforce issues. So we have a major problem recruiting and retaining childcare workers in the state. Our needs assessment uncovered the fact that that 50% of our child care workforce in Kansas is over the age of 50. And think back, this is 2 years ago in 2019. So aging out, but having trouble recruiting. So we have a workforce problem. No secret that across the country, childcare and education professionals are among the lowest paid workers in the United States, with starting pay falling behind retail and restaurant jobs. But in Kansas, we documented the median wage for Kansas childcare workers is $10.20 an hour. And so it is rough to try and convince somebody that this is a viable profession. We know that we have 57% of Kansas counties have at least twice as many children under 5 as available childcare slots. And in 20% of those counties, the ratio is actually 3 to 1 or higher. So we have childcare deserts, and our work has been really focused on how we approach the very deep challenges with trying to address that scarcity. We have issues for employers that involve lack of non-traditional childcare. I think only 8% of Kansas childcare providers offer non-traditional hours. So for shift work and weekend work, that's a problem. Very, very few slots for infants and toddlers. So we know that 67% of children under the age of 5 live in households where all of the adults need to be part of the workforce, don't have the luxury of a stay-home caregiver. So we documented all of the issues, and then we used that information to inform the development of a 5-year strategic plan for early childhood. And we also were fortunate to receive, we were approved for a 3-year renewal of the same federal grant program to help fund some of the systems level change that's needed. So I wanted to share quickly a brief synopsis of the work that we are doing with both that grant, with our regular funding sources, and with pandemic relief funds. We've been able to leverage all of the foundational information to help inform the work being done with the relief dollars, so that we aren't just randomly standing up programs, but we're trying to focus effort on not just the immediate crisis, but what will strengthen the system as we emerge from it. So we've been providing sustainability grants for childcare facilities to help support continuity in their operations and address the costs of COVID mitigation strategies, lower enrollment, higher staffing, to have fewer humans in a room. You need more staff to accomplish that. Providing impact grants based on assessments that indicate how facilities could increase their health and safety and mitigate the risks for COVID-19. We have created a startup program to give stipends to people that we are able to recruit into the profession to help eliminate some of the barriers to entry. So, there's certain licensing requirements, and we've been giving small grants, $2,500 grants, to help cover some of those costs. Providing health and safety grants to make sure that we're assisting with compliance and licensing regulations. We were able to waive background check fees through September of 2023 for childcare providers. There is a network of childcare health consultants that can be deployed to help work one-on-one with a provider or a program to help them make sure they have access to all the resources and supports that are unique to their needs and goals. We are actively at work creating a career pathway for childcare professionals that will give multiple options, but help create a framework for the folks that we are hoping to recruit into the profession, and help retain people, help professionalize the realm of childcare. We are building, I'm about to go out with an RFP, hopefully by the end of this month, to secure a vendor to build a workforce registry, which will help both on the state side to administer licensing requirements and track professional development, but also help the providers better monitor their own hours that they have to accrue and professional training opportunities. we have some proposals before Spark. We would love to see a premium pay program of some sort. Most likely the logical thing for our workforce is retention bonuses as the most feasible project that, while it would be nice to always have them, sustainability is top of mind. So we've created a proposal for that, and a couple of other things. Department of Children and Families has enhanced the subsidy rates so that it is more balanced with the cost of care. We're not quite where we need to be, but we've improved the rates so providers can receive a little bit more through that subsidy program, and just have worked to align and improve professional development opportunities. Our vision is that while we know we've made some substantial progress, it's not enough. We need a solution that will help us address the wage issue and the effect this has on family income. It's really hard to ask families to pay more out of pocket than they already are for care that tends to be very expensive. And we know that at the same time, staffing ratios and the like make the profit margin very slim for the providers themselves. So we hope to leverage existing investments in alignment with our strategic plan, but anchor it in the true cost of care and not just market rates, and incentivize quality improvement and retention. So we have done a lot of research over the last couple of years. We have some nice models from other states that have been inspirational. We have certain communities doing this well, that have some interesting programs that we would love to scale in more places around the state. We have engaged some national experts to help us create an actual calculator to determine regionally the cost of care and help us create a cost model that might be viable. And we are really working to recruit people through a variety of different initiatives. So we appreciate legislative action to create the Promise Scholarship Program, which is a program that included early childhood development as an allowable career pathway through higher ed. Certainly protecting the CTE programs in high schools to expose kids to the profession. We've wrapped in commerce to a lot of the planning so that we are hoping to develop an apprenticeship program, and I am really hopeful that we are successful in landing funding that would allow the cabinet to start making grants that would be a full package that would help provide gap funding to help communities build new capacity, physical space, whether you're renovating or building from green fields, and marry that up with some operational startup funds so that we can help hold hands with new programs and help startup go smoothly and successfully. We've got some nice models in the state, and we're hoping to see approval for the proposal that we've got pending. So I want to stop because I want to leave time for questions from the group.
So we do have some good questions, but the most recorded question is, can you explain the Dolly Parton in the background?
I would love to. So last year, the legislature used a budget proviso to name the Children's Cabinet as the state level lead to implement the Dolly Parton Imagination Library program statewide. We currently have it through local affiliates, so it's nonprofits across the state. Dane G. Hansen Family Foundation, lots of library foundations or United Way chapters tend to be the most common, but there are some other funders that have stepped in to bring the program in a very localized way. And so as state partner, with any luck, the Children's Initiative Fund budget will be approved, and I will have funding that will allow us the freedom to partner with all of those existing affiliates and match 50 cents of every of the cost of every child. 50% would come from us and 50% from the local funder, so that we can double the coverage. And then it will give us flexibility to truly be a statewide partner and bring it to, our goal is every county. So right now, the funding that I have to use is federal funding that's limited, can't be used to supplant. So they did not approve the 50% match arrangement. So we are able to fund in those counties that don't currently have a program. The work involves finding a local nonprofit to partner with. And so if you're thinking, hey, we'd love to bring that to our county, we don't have it currently, help me identify a local partner, and we are happy to get in business doing this. So they sent me Dolly to join me in all my virtual meetings and inspire the project. She's going to go to the State House with me next week. So
it worked.
Yeah.
So KEDA itself supports increased access to childcare tax credits and frankly, increasing the bucket as a whole around tax credits. What role do your team play in this discussion?
So the cabinet is we have a governing board, appointments made by the governor and legislative leadership. I have a 9-member governing board, and they definitely passed a recommendation to support there's a small tax credit that exists, but only for C corporations. So we want to restore eligibility to all the other business classes so they can participate and receive. I think it's a maximum of $50,000 per year, but for effort from employers to support the childcare needs of their employees, there is a small tax credit. I'd love to see, and I know Commerce has a vision for a more robust program, but we're kind of taking things one step at a time and looking for progress where we can find it. But yes, tax credits are one way. Employers can, there's a federal program that's structured like a health savings account program where the employees can set up a savings account and do a pre-tax deduction from their own paycheck. An employer could put a contribution into that account as well. I think there is some federal benefit from that. That already exists. I know we have partners across the state in the world of economic development already putting community teams together to try and approach the issue locally. We try to be supportive to those projects we know about, and just really help champion the idea that this is not just a babysitting question. This is dealing with the needs of today's workforce and preparing the workforce of tomorrow. So in whichever way you look at it, it is a problem for employers. That is a major component of healthy economic development. So I have had conversations with specific employers that are seeking assistance, wanting to be partners. There are examples of employers that have made contributions to different projects in the state. So we're just hoping to grow those efforts. And ideally, some of the relief funds that are out there can help be brought to bear on the equation. My own budget, we only have 18 million a year to grant, and it's really committed to programs, programs, the delivery of services. So starting new programs I need a new source of funding to help expand statewide.
I think, I think this is a good segue, just having you be part of this program and knowing that KEDA has now added childcare into our legislative platform to say, look, this has become a big issue as we have, challenges finding workforce. And I tell our folks locally all the time that, you know, a lot of our companies are managed by men, and men tend to rely on their spouses, with, you know, the mom to take care of childcare, and they don't always understand the impact of that, right? And yet
Right.
we need women to get back into the workforce. So with that, how can we as economic developers be more of a resource to you? How can we be helpful? And then do you have any other thoughts about how we should be engaging our businesses on this issue?
Yeah, and probably not enough time today to focus on it, but yes, I would love to be considered a resource, a connector, if you will. I personally don't do all of this work. I have an amazing team that helps support us, but I can help connect when you need assistance. I want to put a plug in for the work the Finney County Economic Development Authority has done. I think Lana at this point has created a boot camp that is designed for all of you, the economic development side of the conversation, to help coach in the approach that she has found successful out in their region, and she's been doing some great things. So she certainly got community level dollars for a development project that they have, and shared that once they had some local government funding, Tyson was willing to match. And so she's been able to put together a fund. She's been able to work with housing developers who have made a commitment to including additional childcare space in new housing developments based on the census of those developments. You know, for every X number of homes, there will be additional capacity. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do as a team. There are communities that are doing this well. They're at various stages, but I know, you know, not just Garden City, but Dodge City, Emporia, Manhattan, Colby. There are projects in development at Lindsborg. I mean, they're large and small communities have brought local government officials, both city and county, economic development interests, local businesses, higher ed, so be it the community college or what have you, the school districts, and childcare providers, and, you know, faith-based, community-based, home-based. There's different licensing categories, but you need some of those voices at the table, and you need really, it's helpful to hear from the parents themselves, and you know, a representation of the challenges faced in a given community. So when you have those players around the table, it's a more effective conversation as you seek to put solutions in place. It's kind of an all hands on deck necessity to have everyone working together. So if I can be useful, I will pop our website and my email address in the chat, and you know, it might be me directing you to the right person, but I would be happy to help. We have navigators, we have specialists, we have, you know, we've been successful at solving licensing challenges and different issues that have cropped up to help keep program doors open and help new providers get started. So we're just looking to continue that.
Thank you, Melissa. I want you just to know that we're an advocate as well. We see this as a big challenge across the state, and we look forward to working with you. I think over the long term, I hope you'll continue to be engaged with us, and my guess is that you'll have folks reaching out to you as well. So thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yep, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Janet, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, great. And we appreciate Melissa being here. And I'm getting ready to turn it back over to you, Greg. So Mitch and Greg were are still serving as the co-chairs for our legislative groups. There was just so much going on that I asked Greg to help Mitch with what he was doing. Little did I know at the time that Apex was in our future. So Apex required an awful lot of people to move very quickly earlier in the session. And I think that there will still probably be things after turnaround that we'll need to respond to. So I want to appreciate those of you that provided testimony to that. And we had to move quickly as that evolved. So appreciate those of you that were flexible once again as we did that. Greg, I think you're going to introduce Sandy, but I do think that we're going to kind of skip over the part with our legislators because neither of them were able to join us. Is that correct?
That is correct. Their schedules changed, and so we're going to sort of shorten up the program and move right into Sandy Braden. So many of you know Sandy. She's no stranger to KEDA. So many of you know her, but I'm going to do a short introduction anyway. So Sandy Braden is the president and owner of Heidner Lowe and Associates. She brings more than 30 years of federal and state government relations, development of issue management strategies, association management, and civic and political event planning experience to the firm. Sandy has provided her experience to KEDA now for the last 5 years. She received her BS from the University of Nebraska and her MS from Kansas State University. Originally from Republic County, Kansas, she started her lobbying career in 1986 in Missouri. And something you may not know is that Sandy has an extensive Barbie doll collection containing about 3,500 that are in boxes and another 500 dolls that are not in boxes. And her collection includes one of the first Barbies ever made in 1959. So here to update us on legislation of interest to KEDA and give us her thoughts is Sandy Braden.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of give you an update. I think Mary has some slides that I'll just kind of briefly go over. And go ahead with the second slide. As many of you have heard that the legislators were not available to join you, that's because they left town today. And they were scheduled throughout tomorrow. Tomorrow is what is normally known as turnaround, where bills should be out of one house going to the other house. And they got done early. The Senate was out, the House was out on the road home before noon. And the Senate adjourned about 3:30 this afternoon. So they're all headed home before whatever next weather comes in tomorrow. I will say in general, before we get into the issues, we are looking at a point in time where the major issues of tax policy, revenues, what we do with the revenues, which kind of is closely aligned with the tax policy, as well as redistricting and others, are at a standstill at this moment, because that's usually a second half of the session type activity. So I'll just start with the redistricting. Redistricting, as you know, they passed and overrode the governor's veto for the congressional map. The congressional map was then sent to the courts. And so we will be watching that to see how the congressional map comes out. The House map and the Senate map were not part of that. So they will be working on both of those to get those through the process in the near future. As I mentioned back in January, we have record revenues, and I'm sure people have mentioned that. And what has kind of slowed it down is waiting to see how Apex plays out. The Apex bill was about a $600 million bill that was very necessary to get Kansas into the running for some really good projects. And so now we will see how that all works out and how the revenues continue to come in or don't come in as we see some of the economic indicators changing with inflation and lower and higher interest rates, as well as lower revenues on Wall Street too. So we'll see how all that plays into how much they have in when they do the revenue estimates in April. And medical marijuana kind of has just not been addressed at all. Sports betting, there was a bill last week that was heard in Fed State that would allow Wichita another vote along with some additional slot machines. That has not been worked. Medicaid expansion isn't expected to be addressed this year. Workforce issues, I think you've had the best you could on those issues with the housing and with on the childcare issues, etc. A lot of those are not bills. Housing issues, there's a couple of them. There's one to expand the rural housing development that was passed last year for a second story and above in certain areas to any county that can meet those criteria. There was a couple of other housing bills. I think the major thing that you're going to see is maybe some additional monies put towards that, which of course is an appropriations process. And all of the, not only just from those kind of issues, but broadband deployment, how do we keep Kansans here to work and allow them to work from home, the whole work from home issues. You can just go on and on and on, but those are some of the issues that they're addressing, but it's going to be more through an appropriations process and some establishment of some language. ARPA funds, the process, they've got subcommittees put together on those ARPA funds. They asked for a request for the money. I was watching one of them last week, and I don't even remember which one it was, which was a subcommittee, but they had over 150 requests for funds. So these committees will have to go through all those requests and then see where they want to distribute the money. So I think I'll go ahead and go to the next slide, and I probably have covered some of that too. Yep, the redistricting I already did. And go ahead, the budget. Go ahead and back up a little bit on the budget. The multiple options to spend. There's a plan out there to add $1 billion to CAPERS. There's also a multitude of sales tax reduction bills, from providing sales tax reduction for broadband equipment. There's the sales tax on food. There's tax refunds. There's property tax reductions. There's debt reduction. There's income tax reductions. There's a rainy day fund. So as you can see, there are all kinds of ways they could spend their $3 billion. And a lot of that then, and go ahead, Mary, the next one, will kind of all work around whether or not the economic development, the APEX, comes into play. The base program with ARPA funding is through the Commerce Department. That was $100 million that applications could be put in for certain areas. And like I mentioned, the ARPA funds process is pretty much, they've got some subcommittees that are reviewing applications that then down the road will look at different funding options for those. Go ahead. Again, I kind of went through all those, and really, I think we're just waiting for the second half of the session. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot more activity on, especially the tax issues, a lot of the appropriations issues, school issues, and anything else. And we all have to remember this is an election year. And June 1 is the deadline for folks to sign up for their seats. And right now it's kind of hard to do without knowledge of what the map looks like. So I'm sure they'll be working on that in the near future to see where we are from an election standpoint. So you will start to see a lot of issues that are set up for election, postcards, etc. So the next couple months will be fast and furious. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, they did. A couple of questions have come in. One, do you have any prediction about whether the governor will get the request for the food sales tax reduction? I know you're not in the prognostication game, but you also know the
I could
minutia behind
only,
the scenes.
I probably wouldn't have to be here if I did that. But no, I think right now there's a bill in the House, 2711, that was introduced a couple of weeks ago. That's going to be heard after turnaround. It'll be heard next week. And I can't remember if it's Tuesday or Wednesday. It is a bill that ratchets the sales food tax down. It takes it to, I believe, 3.5%. And then anytime that there's $100 million or more in the stabilization fund on the state's level, that it goes down another percent. So it is a march to zero type for food sales tax, but it does not, it doesn't take it all at once. And I think there's a lot of legislators that are interested in taking a measured approach to some of this. And I think the food sales tax is a very popular thing. I just don't know if they're going to get to zero right off the bat.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that might actually be a good win-win solution anyway. Another thought is, or question is, how much political capital was expended as a result of the Apex legislation in terms of, will any of the other economic development related issues get much traction because of the Apex discussion?
I think there's a couple of things to talk about there. The Apex legislation has its own, how do I want to say this? It was a bipartisan effort. Once everybody started realizing what the potential was there, it was a bipartisan effort. It was not whether or not it was going to pass, it was, and it's always the devil in the details. And how does that work? I think there was another thing that happened with that. And that was the understanding that if Kansas is not in the ballgame right now for some of these technology projects, and this is Sandy Braden, this is me kind of looking at it from afar, that if we're not in it right now, it could be 10 to 20 years before that next wave of big projects like this comes along. You've got all of this battery technology, you've got all of the cars, you've got solar technology, you've got all of these new technologies coming into play. And if you don't jump now, you may miss this opportunity and it'll go to another state. I know of a situation that they were looking for 3,000 acres of ready to build land. And it was a car manufacturer with the battery. Well, we don't have 3,000 acres ready just right now. Sunflower ammunition plants doesn't have 3,000 of remediated property. So when David says that they've missed 11 big deals, I believe him. I think that that is part of what we have to start looking at, is seeing if you want to play in this technology game, you have to be there and you have to be willing to compete. Now, the second half of your question was, how does the legislature look at other economic development in that perspective? In some respects, I think that highlighted that for both Republicans and Democrats, that, okay, we've got the money right now. What can we do to help the people that are already here? And I think there's some sentiment to try to see if there's something that can't be done to help economic development in the state beyond the big mega projects. And I kind of wish Sean Tarwater could have been here because I think he probably could have said it much better. But I think there is that recognition that, okay, we got the big deal done. Now let's look and see how we can help some of our folks in state. So I think it did a couple things. I think it highlighted that we can be competitive with the big dogs, but it also highlighted that we also need to take care of our own and try to keep people in our state from leaving because they get opportunities here also.
Thank you. I am not seeing any additional questions in the chat box, Janet.
I think you're clear.
Okay, very good. Does anybody else have questions that they'd like to ask Sandy before we move to the next item? All right, thanks, Sandy.
Thank you.
Greg, are you ready for your quick summary?
Am I? That's a good question. Not quite yet, apparently. I can't seem to find the file that I was looking for
You
that I've
need
had
another
open all
sound.
day long. Literally have had it open all day long.
Well, maybe while you're doing that, Sandy does do weekly updates for us that get emailed out. Currently, as part of our web upgrade and all of that, our website is down. And so until the website comes back up again, those are going to be emailed out directly to members rather than posted on the website.
All right. Can you see my my screen, Janet?
Yes, sir. It shows the preview mode also. So if you've got any notes down there you don't want us to see, you might want to change the view.
All right.
But it's not like you have a lot of slides, so.
I don't, and I don't have any notes either. So,
Okay.
so we're going to breeze through this pretty fast because I know that I am in the tail end of this. So, just to recap, a lot of the things that technically Lieutenant Governor Tolan kind of talked about was the successes from last year, the decoupling of KIT and KER. This was the transfer of credits. This is something we've been pursuing for some time. That was accomplished last year. There was the extension of the STAR bonds for another 5 years. There were some changes made to that. Increased the amount of investment that was required in metropolitan areas, but it also lowered the threshold for smaller communities to do STAR bonds. The angel investor tax credit was again another 5 years. Quite a bit of discussion about the RHID. That's been really a fantastic program. I think several of us, even in larger counties, appreciated when those RHID districts could be extended to smaller cities, even if you're in a larger population. I think there's a lot of great success stories. We heard a little bit about that even from Ryan Vincent. The rural opportunity zone extensions and some changes. I think all of those were well received. And then, of course, I think most of us were incredibly supportive of the idea that tourism was brought back to Kansas Commerce. So those are just a quick snippet of the successes from 2021. When we look at 2022, we've talked some more about additional support for rural housing programs and the benefits of those. Frankly, we've had quite a bit of conversation today about child care tax credits with Melissa Rooker, as well as just generally the growing need for child care across the state. So I don't expect this issue to go away anytime soon. I don't get the sense that there's a groundswell of legislative activity around this, but I think it's going to have to take a lot more effort on our part and others to really start making this more of a concerted effort at the legislative level. There's discussion about the additional the work from home piece of it. How do we incentivize that, particularly in light of the pandemic lasting much longer than we'd all anticipated. This discussion about liability protection for work-based learning, that's really geared towards internships for students, particularly those who are still in high school, making sure that we can get them into work-based opportunities without creating liability issues for the company. There's this discussion about R&D matching funds to match federal R&D programs. That was fairly self-explanatory. And then we've had quite a bit of conversation about Apex. So Janet, that's just a kind of a quick hit. Mitch has really been the driver for keeping up with the legislative committee and putting a lot of this information together. I know he's not on the call today, but sincere appreciation for the work that he has done to keep all this moving forward. And I guess if I could pose a question, really probably back to Sandy, it would be that we sent bags to all of the legislators for advance of the legislative day event that we ultimately had to cancel. But there were some things in there that we'd never really done that before. Any feedback at all from any of the legislators or any feedback that you might have gotten when your team handed those bags out?
No, because usually they're handed to the secretary. And you really don't get much feedback. And probably if you got feedback, it'd be back to the folks that had their name on anything in the bag. So
I was just curious. That was something we had done differently this year. We obviously did the legislative brochure this year as well. And I was just curious if any of those things had resonated or we got any feedback. But okay, Janet, that's all I really have. I just was going to try to wrap it up. If people had questions about the legislative platform, I wasn't going to spend a ton of time on it just because we've covered a lot of these issues a couple of different times today.
Thanks, and appreciate the investment that your organization made in helping us put that legislative platform in a more user-friendly manner and be able to provide that to them. So I know that's something that Mary has provided out electronically in the past, and maybe maybe now at turnaround time, it's a good time to ask her to include that with the legislative update from Sandy this week, so people get a chance to see that. I know that we had copies to hand out at this event when we had it in person, so she's probably got a couple of copies, but if we could do the electronic copy, that would be great. So I'm going to do a quick wrap up with some reminders. Thanks again to Kansas Manufacturing Solutions, Opportunity Funding, Gorilla Bet, Salina Community Economic Development Organization, Wyandotte County Economic Development Council, and the Greater Wichita Partnership. Appreciate all the speakers and each of you who joined us this afternoon, although it's really cold to be outside, to be somewhere else. Would like for you to save the date on your calendar, September 27th through the 28th. We are going to be in Salina. I don't know, what would stop us at this point, but we are going to be in Salina. So I see Tracy nodding her head and probably Mary shaking her head in the background, but we are working on being in person in Salina, September 27th through the 28th. So save that. Information for registering for that fall conference will be coming out to you soon. In the meantime, registration is open for our next educational webinar, which is March 16th. Alicia Hutchins is going to be, and her staff from Department of Commerce will be kind of our guest speaker that day to let us know how we can be more productive and more helpful for their team. So other than that, thank you again for being here. And that's the extent of our conference for the day. So we appreciate your time. Thank you. Mary, Vernon was going to stick around for a minute.